Hi, and welcome to Carolina Journal's coverage of Election Night 2024. We are so glad that you're here with us. We've got lots of races to cover and a long night ahead. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal.
I'm Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst for the John Locke Foundation, and we're joined for this first segment, Donna, by Dr. Andy Jackson, director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation, and our in-house expert on all things election administration.
All right, so Andy, if you would tell me first, polls getting ready to close here at 7:30, but not everywhere around the state.
Not everywhere. We had a couple of delays in different places in Wilson County. They had a problem with their voter check-in system, or I should say their printer, so they couldn't get people to sign in. In Burke County, they had a problem with their e-poll books. Some places, a lot of places these days even more, have their poll books on computers. They couldn't get the computer booted up. Both of those precincts are going to be delayed. They're closing until 8 o'clock. So those two counties, Wilson and Burke, aren't going to be able to report. All the other counties are going to be able to start reporting as soon as polls close at 7:30.
All right, now tell me about this reporting process. That's something that we all watch really closely. You're not sure what we're going to know when. Tell me what you're...
Right, well, we've got kind of a staggered system here in North Carolina. So as soon as polls close, they're going to release their absentee data, the several 100,000 votes. Those are going to come in almost instantly. Those tend to lean Democratic. And then once the polls close, they're going to start the tabulation of the early votes. This is a change in the law. It used to be that the mail and the early votes got released instantly at the same time. This time, early votes are going to start getting counted. Depends on how many tabulators, how many ballots, but starting probably somewhere around 8-ish, those early votes are going to start coming in all the counties and probably be done with that by 8:30, 9 o'clock. And about that time, when you're about done with the early votes, the precincts are going to start reporting, probably starting as early as 8:30, but they're still going to be trickling in all through the night. It will have most of our ballots in North Carolina are counted by about 11 o'clock, unless there's a big glitch. So, unless you're a really early to bed kind of person, you're going to know who's going to win most races in North Carolina before you go to bed tonight.
Sure, sure.
Now, these results, as election officials tell us, are unofficial. They won't be official until there's a vote canvassing several days down the line. But one of the things you have been talking about over the past couple of days is that we should know who has won most of these races by the end of the night, unless there's some really close contest.
Right, and we saw that. We've seen this. Generally speaking, what you see on election night is basically what you're going to see when you have the county canvasses, which are done on the second Friday after Election Day, about 10 days later. And so those results, there's going to be very little variation. And the closest thing we saw to that was probably 4 years ago when Paul Newby in the state Supreme Court race on election night, he was about 3,000 votes ahead. And in that year, there was a lot of mail ballots, and the deadline after this court agreement was 9 days after Election Day. So there were still a lot of mail ballots still coming in. And by the time of the county canvass, that lead was down to a little over 400 votes. So that was the closest we've come. But unless there's a real problem, like we saw, for example, in the 9th District race in 2018, where that got overturned due to election fraud, what you see on election night is what you're going to get on the county canvass.
Sure. Go ahead.
And it really does also depend on how close the race is, because longtime veterans of North Carolina elections will remember back when there was an election for state superintendent of public instruction that had June Atkinson and Bill Fletcher. It appeared on election night that Fletcher had won, but after provisional ballots were counted, Atkinson won. There was legal action. There was a temporary superintendent. And so if there is a really close election, just a handful, hundreds, or maybe even a few thousands of votes, you want to be careful about saying this is the winner.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about early voting. It seems to be benefiting. You have a great piece there on johnlocke.org about what to expect tonight, what you're looking for. What has early voting told you about what we might see tonight?
Well, early voting has told us that Republicans are up a little bit.
Okay.
Democrats are down a lot compared to 2020. Unaffiliated is up about 100,000. And so Democrats are underperforming. Now, part of that is a result of registration changes. There are there's a couple 100,000 fewer Democrats now than there were 4 years ago. There's tens of thousands of more Republicans, so that's a partial reflection of that reality. The landscape has changed.
Sure.
And part of that is behavior has changed. Republicans have really been pushing early voting, trying to get their folks to come out earlier. It's beneficial to your party if your voters come out early, because then you can devote your resources to these more low propensity voters.
Sure.
And so that's probably good news for Republicans, but this leads to questions. You know, obviously we're missing a big election day piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah.
And so how is that going to be different? There has been some indications that Republicans have cannibalized. That is, they have had some of their people that normally vote on election day have voted early. About 140,000 is the estimate that I've seen, compared to about 60,000 for Democrats. And so at least potentially Democrats can do better on their election day returns than they did in 2020. It's a matter of, you know, are we going to see that, or are we going to see a continuation of this comparatively low Democratic turnout continue into election day? And that is the big interesting question mark that is not going to be answered until we start seeing these totals come in.
Sure.
After you stop chatting with us, what are you going to be watching?
Well, I'm going to be watching several races. I think mostly on the state legislative side, that's what I'm most interested in.
Sure.
There's a couple of House races in Wilson and Nash counties. Both of those are districts that lean a little Democratic, although they are trending Republican over time.
Sure.
Republicans won both of those in the last time around in 2022. And so can those incumbents hold on in a different political environment where you have kind of max turnout on both sides? And obviously there's that Senate race, state Senate race down, Michael Lee down in New Hanover County. That, you know, New Hanover is kind of the bellwether county. And, you know, and the other obvious one is the state Supreme Court race, where, you know, that's the only one, you know, at the top of the judicial ticket this year. And, you know, that's an entire branch of government. So it's a big one.
Right. What about the Civitas Partisan Index? This is something we've talked about a lot here at the Locke Foundation and at Carolina Journal. A lot of people using it as a good way to measure some of those districts.
It is. And the thing you got to remember is the Civitas Partisan Index is a baseline indicator. So this will tell you, because we draw out this kind of aggregate data from all these statewide races, and then we put them into all the precincts, and then we add the precincts into the districts. It takes a bit of work. But this will tell you kind of the baseline tendency of the district. What it doesn't tell you is a lot of these other important factors like candidate quality, who's done the better fundraising, what's the political environment. But, you know, if you're looking for races that are close, that are probably should be close, then the Civitas Partisan Index is a good way to start your journey.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll be watching those really closely. If you want to get more information, you can certainly go over to carolinaelections.com to get the latest numbers and what you're seeing, and then we'll have coverage throughout the evening here on Carolina Journal, and certainly there's going to be updates throughout on carolinajournal.com. Dr. Andy Jackson, I hope you'll come back throughout the evening, give us updates on what you're seeing as these results come in.
Will do.
Fantastic. All right. So we've got our entire team is here at Carolina Journal. We've got reporters that I know you know and love and follow regularly on carolinajournal.com, visiting all the different parties, the different watch parties throughout the evening. And we're going to be talking a lot with them and getting updates, certainly on the Supreme Court race, on the congressional races. We've got 14 districts out, and of course 16 electoral college votes at stake here in the race for the White House. So let's head over to our newsroom. We've got Nick Craig is standing by here. He's the host of the Carolina Journal News Hour on WBT in Charlotte. He is standing by there with Jeff Moore, Carolina Journal's deputy editor, with the latest on what we can expect and what we're going to be covering for you here on Carolina Journal.
Hey, Donna, good evening. Appreciate the invite here, and we are tracking, of course, everything in regards to the election going on today. But as we're waiting for polls to close here in about 15 minutes or so, I wanted to dig into some of these early voting totals from 2022, because that's really what's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. When you look at the race between, Jeff at the time, Trump and Joe Biden, just before Election Day even started, Joe Biden was ahead by over 216,000 votes. So that was the margin that Republicans not only had to make up on Election Day to catch up to zero, and then Trump ended up winning the state by 74,000 votes total. That was obviously with a huge amount of mail-in balloting in 2020. We've seen much less this election cycle. Give us your broad strokes or overview of where things are standing right now, about 15 minutes ahead of polls closing.
Yeah, it's a far different picture this time around. Typically, Republicans have a structural disadvantage coming out of early voting. Democrats have a higher propensity of early votes historically, and so there's a deficit that Republicans are usually working against as they get into Election Day, but not this time around. Republicans actually bested Democrats in North Carolina as far as the early vote. You've got unaffiliated voters that actually had the highest amount of the early vote, but in 2020, we were looking at about 3.6 million early votes. In 2024, just the in-person early vote is 4.2 million, so that set a record. And then total with absentee ballots, you got 4.5 million thereabouts, which represents about 57% of the electorate in North Carolina. So we've got about 7.8 million registered voters in North Carolina. 57% of them have already voted in the early voting period. So Republicans are coming from a much better starting point going into Election Day, looking to see if any of those early voters cannibalize some of the Election Day voters going into as the polls are coming to a close here. But the data that we've seen actually sees the trend kind of holding up. The Republican throughput should be pretty strong on Election Day, and it's all going to be about turnout in those different areas of the state. We obviously have different voting blocks in the state. We get more rural, red counties, and bluer urban centers, and so it's going to come down to where those votes are really coming from on Election Day to see how it balances out.
Well, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. I mean, you look at this for the 2020 election, Trump had to make up essentially 300,000 votes on Election Day to get to where he was above 74,000 votes. Jeff, is it accurate to say that if we have a similar Republican turnout to 2020 on Election Day, that things are that this race could be potentially a larger margin for President Trump compared to where he was in 20?
Yeah, the numbers seem to be more favorable this time around than even in 2016, and especially versus 2020. Without the hole to dig out of on Election Day, they're coming in with a pretty strong position. And so you've got almost 300,000 less Democrats voting early in this election versus 20. And so that kind of makes about that margin of that they were having to dig out of in 16. So this definitely bodes well for the Trump campaign and for Republicans down the ballot, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you look at those mail numbers in 2020. Joe Biden had just shy of 700,000 votes via mail, compared to 277 for President Trump. There wasn't even, Jeff, 277 mail-in votes total in this entire early voting period.
Yeah.
But so far, I mean, the numbers are so drastically different.
Yeah, and it's a different dynamic entirely to hold the election in that COVID kind of season. It really put it in a very unique space, and this is more typical, but then you've had the extra motivation and enthusiasm of voters, and we've seen that come through in the early vote.
Absolutely. So we're going to see polls close here in about 8 or 9 minutes, and then, of course, we'll get some of those early mail-in votes here. When do you think we'll start really figuring out when the Election Day tally starts trickling in? When do you think we'll actually figure out kind of who's going to be dominating in this state?
Yeah, so some of the Eastern Seaboard swing states, obviously, some of them be more contentious and may draw on longer into the night. But North Carolina, it shouldn't be too late to have North Carolina results start trickling in after these polls close. You're going to have a few precincts that have had some issues, and maybe they get some extensions. We had at least one that was extended to 8 p.m. I mean, you might have some more of those instances, but North Carolina has a pretty orderly process. If we remember back to 2020, it went on for days and weeks sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But North Carolina had a relatively clean election, was able to figure everything out in a timely manner. And this time around, you don't have some of those complications with just the inordinate amount of mail-in ballots. And so it should be pretty straightforward. Have some patience, obviously, with election officials getting the ballots in and getting everything counted. But we should have a relatively early kind of call in North Carolina versus some of these other states. And as you look at Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, importantly, there may be more of a fight there as it gets closer and closer. The polling in North Carolina and the feeling in North Carolina for the Republicans is a little bit more favorable than you would say maybe in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Michigan especially. So more encouraging kind of concrete things to expect in North Carolina early. But those other 6 swing states are going to be hugely important as well.
Let me end with this. If Trump has a larger margin than he did in 2020 compared to where he potentially could later on tonight, does that bode well for Republicans down ballot? We look at the Attorney General race, a supermajority for Republicans in the General Assembly. Does that bode well for those candidates if Trump has a better night than maybe polls are expecting?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, we talk a lot about coattails in political races, and this is a giant coattail to jump on. And if we've got early vote numbers like this and you have a real show-out performance at the top of the ticket, you can expect those races down ballot to actually get picked up as well. We have a governor's race, which is very lopsided in the polling. That might turn out to be a lot closer than people think based on some of those polls if this turnout is really that favorable for Trump.
Jeff Moore with the Carolina Journal joins us as we continue our election coverage this evening. We'll now throw it back to the studio with Donna King and the gang. Donna.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jeff. We're going to be checking back in with Nick and with you, Nick, and certainly with you, Jeff, and folks coming in to the newsroom there to give us updates throughout the night. So make sure you're keeping close eye on things for us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the polls will be closing very shortly at 7:30, and it's a good time to remind people that I don't know if anyone's watching us on their phone, but if you are and you're standing in line, if you are standing in line when the polls close, you are allowed to vote. The law does require people to be able to vote if they are already in line at their polling place. Sure. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier, there are a couple of precincts, one in Burke County, one in Wilson County, that will be open till 8 because of some problems at the polling site.
Sure.
You might notice that Donna and I are now joined by another person,
Yeah.
Donald Bryson, CEO and president of the John Locke Foundation, which oversees Carolina Journal. Donald, we know that you have been watching the election season very closely. What are you keeping up with?
Mostly that it's done.
Yeah.
No more ads.
No more ads.
Yeah.
I can watch football in peace. When I watch elections in North Carolina, it's always incredibly close. A 3% win in North Carolina, in a statewide race is just that's a landslide, right? And we're unique among states in that way. But I look at 2 counties in particular when I'm watching overall states to see how the state's going to go. I look at New Hanover County down in Wilmington, and then I also look at Watauga County. So you've got more of an urban type district and more of a rural type district. They both have sort of regional universities there to see how you can see how the university vote affects those counties.
Sure.
And they're good bellwethers to see how the state's going to go one way or the other. And so as we go through the night, and polls will be closing here soon, in the next 5 minutes here in North Carolina, I'll be interested to see how those counties are developing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's actually hit some of these big races that we're going to be watching throughout the evening. Of course, they're at the very, very top of the ticket, the race for the White House. We have Republican former President Donald Trump facing current Vice President Kamala Harris. Certainly in our last poll in North Carolina, they were tied at 47%. Certainly, North Carolina, purple state, but mainly very, very blue in some areas, very, very red, and that has put them really in a neck-and-neck race. Yeah,
certainly very close, and that is the marquee matchup throughout the country. If you look at the next biggest matchup in North Carolina, it's got to be the race for the executive branch's top job. Governor Roy Cooper, term limited Democrat, not allowed to run for a 3rd consecutive term. So that means it is an open seat. And your 2 candidates are the Attorney General, Democrat Josh Stein, and the Lieutenant Governor, Republican Mark Robinson. We've all seen that the polling in this race has basically been going Stein's way. The last Carolina Journal poll had a 13-point margin for Stein. Anyone who has been following this, and Donald, I know you've talked to people about this too, anyone who's been following this will tell you they don't expect a double-digit win for Stein, but most people are expecting him to win.
Yeah, I think that's right. And our poll, I think, what do we have? Did you say plus 13 for Stein? That was well within the national, or the average for all the polls that have been going on. I think we saw some even up to 17 points for Stein. But I would imagine that poll's tighter. I would expect maybe 6 or 7 point win for Stein tonight.
Sure, sure. And if we move through there, we also have a seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court. That right now is Republican Jefferson Griffin facing sitting. She was appointed to the court by Governor Cooper. Democrat Allison Riggs. Those two, that is the only seat right now. It would not shift the balance of power there on the North Carolina Supreme Court. It would certainly change the plan for Democrats and Republicans moving forward. But real quick, do you want to roll through those Council of State races? All 10 of our Council of State are on the ballot today.
And most of them are people who did not win the election in 2020. Many times when you have Council of State races, it's an incumbent against a challenger. The incumbent has an advantage. But in so many of these races, these are open seats. So we'll go through them. Lieutenant Governor, you have that open seat once again with Mark Robinson running for the governor's race. So you've got Democrat Rachel Hunt, daughter of the many-time Governor Jim Hunt, against Republican Hal Weatherman. You also have in the Attorney General's race, you've got Republican Dan Bishop and Democrat Jeff Jackson. These are two members of Congress who are both trying to get the top law enforcement job in North Carolina. Secretary of State, longtime Secretary of State Elaine Marshall, the Democrat, who is running against Republican Chad Brown. For state auditor, you have, this is an appointed incumbent, the Democrat Jessica Holmes, running against Republican Dave Bolick. This was the seat that had been held by Beth Wood till she resigned. Holmes got the job from an appointment from Governor Roy Cooper after that. State treasurer, this is an open seat. Dale Falwell, the current treasurer, had run for governor. So you've got Republican Brad Briner, Democrat Wesley Harris. Superintendent of Public Instruction, once again, this is open because the incumbent, Catherine Truitt, ran for re-election, got beat in the primary. So you have Republican Michelle Morrow and Democrat Mo
Very
Green.
closely watched race.
Very closely watched race, the head of basically the public education apparatus in North Carolina. Commissioner of Insurance, this is one of the standard races where you have incumbent against challenger. The incumbent is Republican Mike Causey. He's running against Democrat Natasha Marcus, a state senator. And then Commissioner of Agriculture, the guy who probably usually looks to be the lock, term in and term out.
And was the largest vote getter in North Carolina in 2020.
Really?
He received more votes than anybody else on the ballot.
Wow.
Steve Troxler.
Steve Troxler,
it's got to help to have a state fair during campaigning season.
There you go, running against Democrat Sarah Tabor, and not on our list, but also on the ballot. Libertarians will be sure to tell you, Sean Haw, the former beer candidate, now the Libertarian candidate, Commissioner of Agriculture. Commissioner of Labor, this is an open one with Josh Dobson deciding not to run. So you've got Republican Luke Farley, Democrat Braxton Winston, and then of course your other big race of the 14 races for Congress, one that is seen to be particularly interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So Congressional District 1, everybody's been watching that one very closely right now. We have Republican Lori Buckout is challenging the incumbent Democrat Don Davis. And so really this race has made some national attention because this one seat in northern North Carolina could really shift the balance of power among the parties in Congress in the next session.
Right. And of course, now we've hit 7:30 and polls are closed in North Carolina, and it'll be really interesting to see how it's going on. But it's been so important that I know Donald Trump has been in eastern North Carolina and did some campaigning with Lori Buckout, and then Speaker Mike Johnson was actually down for a last-minute event last week. I think it's the first time I've seen him in North Carolina, and that was it speaks to the importance of that race since the margin in both chambers of Congress is incredibly tight.
And Republicans are likely to make gains in North Carolina anyway. For those who haven't followed very closely, right now, of our 14-member delegation to the U.S. House of Representatives, we have 7 Democrats,
we have a
7
congressional
Republicans.
map.
That was done by a map that was drawn by the courts, not a map drawn by the legislature, which normally draws the map for the congressional elections. So we have 7-7, but the new map that was drawn and that the courts have allowed to survive is almost certain to produce 10 Republican members of Congress, 3 Democratic members of Congress, and then this one seat that could go either way, which is why it's the only one that's really been getting much attention. Once we see results start coming in for Congress, it's very likely we're going to see the incumbents check marks by their names very soon. But this one will be the one to watch.
We'll be watching that really closely. Tell me what you think, Donald, about what will Mark Robinson's the crisis he's had in the last few weeks, month or so. Certainly he got right back out there on the campaign trail, made his case to voters, has a strong base that is, very much supporting him. But those poll numbers aren't great, and will that impact the rest of the down ballot races?
Well, that's difficult to say. So, we do lots of polling at Carolina Journal, and our August poll came out the day that the Mark Robinson story broke.
Sure.
Which, as much as we value our polling, made that poll basically useless for the point of that race.
Right.
But as it came out or that was for our September poll, our October poll indicated that maybe not. Robinson was down, but the rest of the Council of State and the presidential race were actually, very much neck and neck, very competitive, all within the margin of error. And so it's possible, I don't know for sure, we'll find out in a little bit, the poll of all polls is going on right now, but it is possible that Republicans did a decent job of mitigating how much that damage went out to the rest of the ticket. It's also possible that, if that was sort of a story that was planted or leaked for the purposes of hurting Robinson, that perhaps it just came out too early. Voters are, I think, very meticulous in how they vote, but their memories are very short because there's news dropping all the time.
Sure. What are your thoughts on it?
In talking to one Democratic insider about this, the person said one of their fears, of course they wanted to tie everyone to Robinson to help all their other candidates, but one of their fears was that Robinson would be seen as so out there by the people who didn't like what he was doing and didn't want to vote for him, that they wouldn't tie anyone else to him. They'd say, well, this is not the same
But he's
person.
just himself.
He is himself, much the same way Donald Trump is. Donald Trump seems to not be affected by Mark Robinson, and it's entirely possible that Robinson will be seen as so unique that it'll be hard to tie anyone else to him.
Sure. Yeah, we're getting some very, very early returns here. Probably not quite there. We're talking about 1.3%, I guess, is what we've got coming in. So if you do want to take a look at the State Board of Elections dashboard, that's available there on ncsbe.gov. They've got a dashboard going where you can see those returns coming in. Few numbers starting to roll in. Certainly these are some of the absentee ballots that were cast early.
Yeah, that's right. The absentee by mail in particular are probably what we're seeing right now this early.
Right.
One thing I'd like to ask, Donald, you follow politics, you're very much in the know on this, but as the head of a public policy organization, one of the things that's going to be very interesting to you is how these elections affect what the John Locke Foundation does moving forward. So what kind of impact could these elections have on the policies that are of interest to a free market limited government think tank?
That's a really great question, and as you point out, we're not a political organization. We don't endorse or oppose candidates or candidate committees or anything like that, and can't legally. But that being said, it tends to be in modern American politics that Republicans are more on the conservative free market side and Democrats are not. And so what will be interesting to see for our purposes is, constitutionally, the power in the land in North Carolina is actually the General Assembly.
Sure.
We have the constitutionally weakest governor in the nation. And so what I'm watching for is, do Republicans maintain supermajorities in the General Assembly? And if they do, then you're going to see a much more Republican agenda and possibly some free market policies coming out of there. If they do not maintain supermajorities, I'm particularly looking at the one in the state house, but if they do not, then there's going to have to be either some negotiation within the chambers themselves to get Democrats to come along and vote for some bills to override vetoes of a potential Governor Stein, or they negotiate with Governor Stein, who, while he's had a long history of public service and was a former state senator, has been Attorney General for 2 terms, I would call him, at least philosophically, to the left of our current Governor, Roy Cooper, and so not really a fan of the free market right now. I can say that now that the polls are closed.
But building that relationship is going to be key, because that has been a real problem in the last few years between Cooper and the legislature.
And of course, we saw that in the years when there was a Cooper administration and no legislative supermajorities, many of the big issues just came to gridlock, including not having a new budget for a couple of years.
They did. There is one additional thing that Stein brings to the table is the fact that there are still people in the General Assembly that he served with and worked with before.
That's true.
Whereas Roy Cooper had been Attorney General for 16 years.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody that he had worked with at that point, and he'd been a legislator for a long time, was basically gone by the time he came back to deal with the legislature directly as governor.
All right, that's really encouraging. I hope you'll come back later in the evening when we have more results. Let me know what you think. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to head back over, check in with Nick there. He has Brianna Kramer. She is getting ready to hit the road, hit some of those watch parties that we're going to be bringing you the latest information on. Nick, Brianna is there with you. Tell me what you think.
Hey, Donna. Hey, crew. Yeah, we're just waiting. Obviously, we just got that first batch of early results. And one of the really interesting things to watch tonight, and Brianna's joining me here in the newsroom, is we're talking about the General Assembly, specifically a Republican supermajority. Josh Stein is likely to prevail in this contest for governor. And with that, the big question for Republicans is, can they hold a supermajority and essentially nullify the first 2 years of his governorship if he's successful later on tonight?
Yes, that's right. So for the past 2 years, the Republican supermajority in the General Assembly has been able to override Governor Cooper. So, you know, whenever they send any bills over, if Cooper doesn't like it, it doesn't matter. They override it. But right now, their supermajority is in jeopardy. So we're watching very closely tonight if they can keep that. The numbers are very close in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Yeah. They've got 72 Republicans to 48 Democrats, and they need to keep that. Exactly. That is the 3/5 supermajority needed. And then in the Senate side, they've got 30 Republicans and 20 Democrats, and they must retain that as well. So very tight margins, and there's multiple races around Charlotte, around Raleigh, and then in the northeast part of North Carolina that we're watching closely.
What are do you have any of those district numbers in some of those races, just for folks that are watching and have their coverage?
Definitely. So in the Charlotte area, Mecklenburg County, there's a couple we're keeping tabs on: districts 98, 105, and 115. So Tricia Cotham, she's the one who actually gave Republicans their supermajority. So a lot of people are familiar with her.
She made a lot of news a couple years ago. That was a huge thing here in the state.
That's right. So her race we're watching because we're not sure, are the Democrats going to come out because they're upset with her and they want to get a Democrat back in office, and she flipped on them.
Well, so this will be her first time running as a Republican, right?
Yeah, she's running as the Republican incumbent. This is in Southeast Charlotte, and then she's up against the Democrat, Nicole Sidman. So that's one that we're watching closely. It does lean Republican, though, so I'm not exactly sure at this point. And then also 98, District 98 in North Charlotte, that's Melinda Bales against Beth Helfrich, and that is a race with two new candidates. So that's one where it also leans Republican, but we'll have to wait and see. And then we also have a couple in Wake County, districts 35 and 37. We've got some incumbents, but at this point, we're early on in the night, so we'll keep everybody updated as those results come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know this supermajority, Republicans have had a lot of success in the last couple of years being able to pass legislation through a record number of veto overrides. That process, if Republicans are unable to obtain this supermajority, Brianna, it seems like the state could be almost at a stalemate unless Republicans and Democrats are willing to work together, which we have not seen a lot of in the past couple of years here in the state.
Yeah, definitely. It's very important for Republicans to keep that supermajority to get anything done, or else, like you said, it will create a stalemate with Josh Stein likely to be the next Democrat governor.
Sure.
But yeah, there's definitely some other races where Democrats have been targeting them with ads, six-figure ad campaigns, trying to target these vulnerable Republicans. Anything they can do to break that supermajority will give them a leg up for the next long session that starts in January. So there's districts 5, 24, and 25. And those are very tough races for three Republicans. Bill Ward, Ken Fontenot, and Alan Chesser, all representatives in the House. And two of them are in lean Democrat districts now. So
Wow.
They are fighting to keep their Republican seat in a district that now is trending Democrat.
And a couple of those were these are incumbent Republicans now in Democrat districts.
Exactly.
Those are gonna be some interesting races to watch tonight.
Yeah, plus with the attack ads that have been directly targeted at their districts, it's going to be interesting to see if all the money going into this has an impact on the outcome.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the money. I mean, obviously, when we talk about like the presidential race or the governor's race, you expect a lot of what we'll call national media coverage or national money flowing into those races. But from some of the reports that I've been looking at, Brianna, there's national super PAC money going into North Carolina General Assembly races. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, especially because a lot of it is, it's not from right here in North Carolina.
Sure.
So it shows the power at the national level. The eyes are on the North Carolina General Assembly from afar, not just here in state politics, but it also makes a difference, and it's having an impact federally and in federal government and also nationally, because it just shows the amount of power that the Republicans in the state legislature have had for the past 2 years.
Absolutely. Brianna, thanks for the time. We're continuing to watch election results as we continue our Carolina Journal election night coverage. We'll send it back to the studio with Donna King, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. Donna.
Sorry, was that too early? All right, thanks so much. We are watching some of these very early returns coming in. It sounds like Fox and CNN have called the governor's race, but they're really using exit polls right now. We're not quite ready to do it, certainly, but it looks like it's heading that direction.
Yeah, and the polls have been trending toward a Josh Stein win, so I'm guessing they're combining what the polls have said plus their own exit polling. The numbers that are in are very early. They are trending toward the Democrats, but they're way too early to be able to say that this is a
And then, of course, we have Dallas Woodhouse joining us, always with Carolina Journal here. He's got the latest on what his thoughts are on the races and some of the returns that we're going to be seeing here. Dallas, you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I appreciate Nick's reporting.
Good.
He need not worry.
All right.
The Republicans are not losing the supermajorities in either chamber. They're not.
Sure.
The number, I mean, at some point we have to look at what the early voting numbers were, and Democrats are 300,000 voters less net than they were after early voting in 2020. The numbers are horrible for them. I will predict to you that I do not believe maybe they get Tricia Cotham, maybe they get Sossaman, who is I'm sure y'all have talked about that district, which is kind of north in the triangle in a rural area.
Sure.
But it's a heavily Democrat district that probably the Republicans ought not have anyway. But I do not believe so. I do not believe the Republicans will lose tonight one single Republican-held seat. I believe they may pick up one seat in the Senate, and I believe they'll pick up a seat or two in the House. But they and look, I've been wrong before, but the numbers I'm seeing, I do not believe the supermajorities are at risk tonight for the General Assembly.
All right, I know a lot of folks will be breathing easier hearing that from you. You've been around here, the North Carolina politics for a long time, know where all the skeletons are, certainly. And with a Josh Stein in the governor's mansion, what does that mean? Because that relationship seems to have to improve if we're going to get a regular budget and get some good policy going.
I mean, did I log on to fantasy land here? I mean, that's not going to happen. Right. I mean, Josh Stein he's cut out of the same cloth. I agree with Mitch. He's a little bit to the left. You know, and I'll say about this, I mean, nothing personal. You know, the times I've dealt with Roy Cooper over the years, and it's been a long time, I think he's affable. I think he's served the state well. I think Josh Stein is a nice guy. I'm sure he loves his family, but he's liberal. He has the same consultants. He has the same mindset. He will oppose the Republicans at every turn, and that's why Republicans want. And I also think that we overemphasize the you know, if somehow I'm wrong and Republicans were to lose one seat in each chamber and they were to be sitting at 71 Republicans in the House and 29 in the Senate, they will get a lot done. You know, there are ways to get things passed without a supermajority. Now, they won't get everything, but they're not going to get everything anyway.
Right.
I hope, you know, what Josh Stein could do that is different than what Governor Cooper did is Governor Cooper didn't seem to take an extreme interest in governing at times. Right, there were things they could have come together and addressed: infrastructure, reorganizing of state government, you know, and they did work together on some things occasionally. But Josh Stein could take a little different tact on that. I think continually villainizing I mean, we'll see tonight how the election results go, but Republicans have controlled the legislature since this night in 2010. They're going to continue to do it. I think they'll still have supermajorities. So sort of villainizing the Republicans at every corner has not seemed to work too well for them. I'm sorry, I got to loosen this tie. I'm fat and I'm getting ready to choke out here, Donna. But we're good.
Stay with us, though. Mitch has a question.
Just a quick question for you, Dallas. So you referenced District 32, which is that Frank Sossaman seat where he's being opposed by Democrat Brian Cohn. That will be interesting. That is rated on the Civitas Partisan Index as a D+4 now. So that's a reason why it could be competitive.
Well, let me just say this. You got to remember, I think.
But I wanted to ask you, because you follow this very closely, what are you going to be watching in the next couple of hours to say that, yes, this is a great night for Republicans, or no, it's not as good a night for Republicans?
Well, I feel confident with these kind of early voting numbers. Donald Trump is going to win North Carolina, and I think the time and the percentage of the reporting when he goes up, I think we've gotten some of the mail ballots in. It's very early, and he's behind, but I think he'll catch up and he'll get over that. Does he get over them in the actual early vote, where Republicans are generally behind hundreds of thousands, or when we click off when we start doing election day vote? Is that when he goes up? Because I feel confident of that. Number two, what happens with Nash County? That's sort of the heartbeat. That is a county that flopped over from a Trump county to a Biden county. New Hanover did the same thing. I believe it is Anson County. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. That Anson County was the one county that went for Hillary Clinton and then went for Trump. But the first congressional district, the turnout demographic so far after early voting is really bad in that district for Democrats. And so if Republicans pick up that, they will pick up 4 congressional seats. So I am closely watching that. And the Trump overall number matters a lot. If Dan Bishop on the Republican side for Attorney General, Hal Weatherman for Lieutenant Governor have been greatly outspent by the Democrats. They can overcome that if Trump gets to 3.5 or 4-point win. If it's a Trump 1.5-point win, I don't think they make it. But I do think Republicans win the treasurer. I think they win the auditor. I think they win labor. Democrats, I think, obviously win the governor's race. They are favored in public instruction. They'll likely hold on to Secretary of State. Republicans will get insurance. I feel very good that the Republicans will hold on to, is it 4 court seats we have, 1 Supreme Court and 3 on the appeals court?
Yeah, that's what I think so.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think all those go Republican.
All right, great. Dallas Woodhouse with American Majority Action. I hope you'll check back in with us in a few hours when we have more results.
Yeah.
We'll hear what you think.
Donna, can I just mention?
Yeah.
Favoring Republicans more is how vastly different the electorate was in 2020.
Sure.
In part based on very low interest and low propensity Democrats who voted by mail prior to 2020, who had little or no interest in voting, little record of voting, but did vote by mail while they were locked up in their houses during COVID. And Democrats are having a hard time finding those voters again.
They're still locked in their houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Dallas Woodhouse. We'll hear back from you in just a couple of hours. We have more results. We're gonna remember this, and I hope you're right. We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Let's head back over to the newsroom with Nick Craig, chatting with Brene Goforth, talking about what we're seeing on social media this evening.
Hey, Donna. Yeah, we are keeping an eye not only on social media, but Brene, the betting markets, which have become a very interesting discussion as we are in this presidential election cycle. They've been all over the place, call it the last 7 or 8 days. Where are things looking right now in some of the popular betting markets?
Right. So Polymarket, which is one of the most popular, right now Trump is up 2-1 against Harris. Wow. And so this is something that's really important because it's something where normal people are putting their money on these candidates. So that's what makes Polymarket something that's a little bit different than the polls. It's really about what people believe and where people are willing to put their money where their mouth is.
Well, when I was driving up here today, I was listening to a podcast and I heard an ad for Robinhood, that apparently Robinhood, which is like kind of a small term investor app where people can now apparently bet using Robinhood. So it seems like everybody is jumping into this.
Yeah, investing is not just for large banks now. It's for regular people.
Bet on
we
presidential
bet on anything
elections.
now.
Sports betting goes legal in March, and the next thing you know, you're betting on a presidential election. So you talk about this jump, but we saw just a couple of days ago, Trump kind of plummeted in a lot of these betting markets. He was in the low to mid 60s, went to bed one night, woke up the next morning, everything's tied up.
Yeah, and Harris was even ahead in the Polymarket numbers back in October. Very early, she was actually ahead of Trump in those, but it seems like it's been taken over massively in the past few weeks. And today, a lot of the bets are going towards Trump. So that tells us that as these results are coming in, as people are looking at early voting numbers, it seems like people are convinced they're favoring Trump. Everyday folks.
So let's take a look at social media-wise, and spending on social media has been a huge thing this election cycle. Obviously, TV and radio, newspapers are still a big spend, but man, social media has been inundated. You can't escape it no matter what you do. What are you seeing in regards to that?
Yeah, so I took a look at Harris's spending on Facebook, and I took a look at Trump's spending on Facebook to see where they were putting their money. So number 1 for Harris was Pennsylvania, number 2 was Michigan, and number 3 was North Carolina. But that's actually different for Trump. Trump spent more money in Michigan than he did in Pennsylvania, but his number 3 spending was also North Carolina. So North Carolina's had a ton of money flood into it, and everybody's really, really hoping they can pull it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at all of these various races that are going on, and at least in terms of where the candidates have been the last couple of days, it's North Carolina and Pennsylvania. I mean, those are where the main visits have been.
Absolutely. And we saw Trump was here yesterday. That was his last visit. He's had tons of people come in with him, and they are really banking on it. Harris recently pulled ad spending from some large media markets in North Carolina, and that was a huge story because a lot of people are convinced that she's not going to make North Carolina happen.
Absolutely. We saw that almost $2 million pulled there. Brene, thanks for that. Hopefully you'll keep an eye on the betting odds and join us if we got any additional details on that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we are continuing our election coverage this evening on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. We're going to pause for a quick break, get reset, and take a look at some of the latest polls as well as early voting results that are coming into the state at this hour. Continue following our coverage on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. We're back right after this.
Hi, and welcome back. This is Carolina Journal's election night coverage. We are coming to you live from Carolina Journal Studios. We've got all the returns, everything you need to know in analysis and context, certainly to what you're seeing tonight. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal.
And I'm Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst at the John Locke Foundation. I was just peeking at the latest numbers. I think we have 200,000 some votes in. Right now, very Democratic heavy votes, but we will be seeing a change as the evening goes forward. We are joined by Dr. Andy Jackson, who is the director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. And if you were with us in the first hour, we called him the expert on all things election administration in North Carolina. Andy, remind us, what are you watching this evening?
Well, things are kind of unfolding as we expected them to. Right now, Democrats are way ahead in every race. I think if you were at the Democratic Party headquarters, you wish you could, okay, let's stop the counting right now.
Sure.
And at this point, you know, if people are trying to read anything in the tea leaves from these early results, you're not really going to read anything. I mean,
except for one result.
Well, one,
that constitutional amendment for the guaranteeing citizens-only vote.
Sure, we're at
71% support.
Actually, now we're at 75.4% support for that constitutional amendment, citizens-only voting.
Right, and this is something, you know, you got to remember that these are mail ballots that we're having here by and large. So these are heavily Democratic, and you know, this is an issue that traditionally you would associate with people on the right.
Sure.
So you're really looking at, you know, maybe 80% or more support for this constitutional amendment. It makes sense because it's something that is just a clarification of our current constitutional language to make sure that you can't have a judge essentially being able to overturn the constitutional language and say, oh, wait a minute, maybe citizens can vote in whatever county election that the local board wants them to vote in.
Right.
And so this clarifies that, and I think there was common sense in folks who are supporting it.
Sure.
And the fact that you have, you know, a heavily Democratic electorate so far supporting it is a sign that it's going to be
well, there are a lot of people, opponents of it said this isn't necessary, we don't need to do it. But you know, we are seeing in municipalities around the country that there are some cases where they're letting folks who aren't citizens vote in local elections.
I think the big case that really has kicked things off was when Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, voted to allow non-citizens to vote in D.C. races, not federal races.
Sure.
Congress has ultimate authority over the District of Columbia. Congress failed to stop that, which they could have. It's within their constitutional authority to do so. And then a federal judge failed to stop that. So we see what happens if you have a legislative majority unwilling to enforce the rules as they're traditionally known, and if a judge is not willing to enforce the rules as they're traditionally known. And so I think this is another reason that North Carolina needed to get this thing clarified, so we don't have judges or temporary majorities in the legislature wanting to change things.
Right.
And so these, you know, and what this says about any other races, zero. Because there's a lot of people that are going to voted for this that are going to vote for Democrats all the way down the ballot.
We should mention we are past 8 o'clock now, which means that most of the polls, if not all, should be closed by now, though there could be some where people were in line at 7:30 when the polls closed and they were allowed to stay in line and vote. But we know that a couple of precincts were extended by the State Board of Elections to 8 o'clock because of some problems. I have to ask you, Andy, as someone who deals with election administration, deals with the county and State Board of Elections folks, when you have 2,600 precincts across the state, just 2 had reports of some sort of technical problems that had to get an extension. That seems like a pretty good record.
It is a pretty good record, and the local election workers are fairly well trained. They know how to deal with different situations. You know, they've been practicing this. A lot of these folks, you know, they're not spring chickens as far as election administration. You know, these people have been doing this for years and years and years and years. One of the issues we have in North Carolina is that our worker pool is a little bit older. That's a good thing because you have all the experience, but at some point, you know, those folks, you know, we need to get replacements for those folks. But yeah, the election system in North Carolina, there are issues and problems. They crop up every year.
Right.
sometimes, I remember in 2020, we had one tabulator that was used for early voting was also used for election day voting down in Robeson County.
Right.
But they forgot to tabulate the early votes before they took it to the precinct. And so they were missing about 1,800 votes.
Okay.
I know Washington County counted mail ballots twice one time,
Okay.
but they fixed those. Those are quickly fixable things. And so by and large, you know, North Carolina elections are well run, and we're going to know the results on election night, which is a big deal. I think it's reassuring for a lot of folks.
It is, yeah.
You know, even if your candidate loses.
Right.
Something else I'd like to ask on the administration front, and maybe you call this the dog that didn't bark. We heard a lot of complaints before the voter ID law went into effect that voter ID was going to be a hassle, it was going to cause all kinds of problems. I haven't heard anything about voter ID being a problem during this general election, even though this is the first major election in which voter ID has been used.
Yeah, North Carolina has a really soft voter ID law. Now, it's if you look at the checkbooks, North Carolina is considered a strong ID state because we require a picture ID. You know, not every state that requires an ID requires a picture ID, but there is a whole host, a whole slew of different IDs you can use. You know, your driver's license, your tribal IDs, college IDs, work IDs.
But hard ones, not digital. Correct.
Yeah, not digital.
Can't use that UNC Chapel.
No, not that UNC Chapel one.
No, exactly.
And if you don't have any of those, you can pick up a free ID. I was down in Yancey County a couple weeks ago watching some early voting, and 3 young ladies came in, got their IDs, and then walked on over and voted early. You can do that in North Carolina. And if you, for some reason, you can't or won't do that, if you're somebody that has a religious objection to having your picture taken, for example, you can fill out an exception form, and unless the County Board of Elections unanimously determines, all 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, determines that this exception form was fraudulent, they're going to accept it. So it's really easy to work with this ID law. There have been complaints that it's actually not strict enough because of all these exceptions and all these various IDs. So yeah, it's really not going to be an impediment to people that want to vote.
Sure. So those of you who are watching some of these early returns, right now, we're about 5.6%, but it's leaning very, very blue because a lot of these are going to be those absentee mail-in ballots. If you are checking, you can be checking those results on the dashboard at the State Board of Elections website, ncsbe.gov. But who are those first ones? What are the votes that we're seeing coming in? Which, by the way, I want to point out, we've got 7.7 million ballots cast right now. That's what the State Board of Elections is saying.
7.7 million registered voters. I don't think all of those will come in. What you'll end up seeing is by the time the numbers are done, there will be a
that would have been 100%.
Yeah, that's right. There will be a percentage of that, and that will tell us what the overall turnout was.
And it should be pretty high is what we're expecting.
We're expecting, I mean, we were a little short of pre-election voting by about 150,000, and so, but you know, that is certainly within range of breaking the turnout totals in 2020. It's just a matter of, you know, is there motivation for folks to get out there and vote on election day? So it may be a close thing.
Sure. We've got 20 out of 2,600 precincts reporting, so very early in the evening if you're watching.
And we are seeing, though, that the start of the shift, because the first numbers that came in, and one of the reasons why we haven't really been going through tons of numbers is because the numbers that came out early were so skewed toward the Democrats that you knew things would be changing. But now we're getting a little bit of that move toward the Republicans with looking at the federal races. About 430,000 of the votes have now been counted. And if you look at the presidential race, you have Kamala Harris in the lead. But what had been about 70% is now down to 54% to 44%. We'll be seeing it move in Donald Trump's direction as more numbers come in.
Absolutely.
I will say the inflection point where Trump came out ahead in 2020 was around 10 o'clock. If Trump is going to win, it's probably going to be a little bit earlier this time around, maybe 9:30.
All right, we'll certainly be watching that very closely. Andy Jackson, I really appreciate you being here with us. We're going to be watching you. Where can people find your updates throughout the evening? So I know that they want to hear it.
Well, frankly, just find me on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Right.
I'm really looking at stuff that may happen on the administrative side, so I'm not really doing the play-by-plays tonight. But there are a lot of folks that do that. Just stay here watching this. Just keep up on Carolina Journal. If you're looking for results, if you're looking for complaints about administrative stuff that may crop up, that's where you'll look for me.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you joining us. We'll be following you very closely throughout the evening. All right, so we are going to head back over to the newsroom with Nick Craig. He's there with Jeff back. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're hearing from the State Board of Elections, but really also about how the RNC and how the Republican Party made a shift from 2016, 2020 to now 2024. Guys, tell me what you think.
Hey, Donna. Yeah, thanks. So we're continuing to track, as you've been noting in the prior segment. These results are still way too early to really to do anything really substantial with those numbers. But Jeff, talking about some of the things that the RNC, that the Trump campaign has done differently this go around, we're seeing some numbers, at least out of Florida right now, showing that he is running up the numbers in that state. It was projected to be an 8 or 9 point race. He's upwards of 12 percentage points right now. Are we seeing a change in generally what we used to know as swing states? I mean, Florida and Ohio seemingly aren't even close to that anymore.
Yeah. As I grew up and watching presidential elections, Ohio and Florida were the quintessential swing states, and they have shifted so solidly into the red territory that they're no longer in that conversation. Now we have states like North Carolina, the great state of North Carolina, and these other swing states, but also through these last 8 years or so, you've seen a shift overall, and you've seen a lot of shift in the organization of the party itself with the advent of President Trump in 2016, and that really mixed things up within the party organization.
Sure.
And then 20, you had a campaign that was kind of marred by the COVID environment and everything like that, the absentee ballots being such a high percentage. Also, the organization is a lot different. You had Ronna McDaniel at the head of the RNC. You have a lot of vestiges of the old establishment kind of GOP that Donald Trump in many ways ran against in 2016. This time around, I think you see a relationship among the Trump campaign and the leadership of the RNC that is really like attached at the hip. And you can see how seamlessly they've worked together to get to this point. And we see some of the results in the early voter turnout and how well they were able to get out the vote there among Republicans, actually with Republicans leading the way over Democrats here in North Carolina. So I think that makes a big difference. And I think you've seen through the campaign, of all three campaigns that Trump has run, that this seems to be the smoothest and most efficiently run campaign. Obviously, he has some big outside factors. Someone tried to assassinate him over the summer.
Back on July 13th,
yeah. And his personality seemed to kind of change after that. His campaigning style changed a little bit, and he became a little bit more presidential. And you also see some of the markers of the good relationship with the RNC and them just kind of really being hand in hand and operating. He's got Michael Whatley, who used to be the chair of the NCGOP here in North Carolina.
There's a huge North Carolina tie here.
Yeah, and Whatley, full disclosure, I used to work with Michael Whatley, but he is a very, very good operator, very hard worker, and he is all over the place into the details of the electioneering and making sure that they cover all the bases, election integrity, things like that. I believe that they were fighting some election integrity issues in Wisconsin earlier that they were able to get resolved. But you see that relationship and how close they are versus maybe how Trump world and the divide between a Trump world and the RNC in 2016 and especially in 2016.
Well, and I think that's important to note. I mean, you had the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, 2016 to 2018, that it was a very interesting time. You had a lot of Republicans, not only at the RNC, but those sitting in Congress that were not happy that Trump was not only their nominee, but then won. That created a huge division. And whether folks like to hear this or not, Jeff, this is currently Trump's Republican Party.
Yeah.
And when you can say that you don't like that or you wish it wasn't, but it is. He is in complete control of that party.
It has fully flipped, and you can make an argument that did he win them over, or was it just a reality they had to deal with? But you saw the discomfort of like an uncomfortable marriage in those first couple of years. And in 2018, you saw some of the results of what happens in an uncomfortable marriage, and you had a lot of messy results for the Republican Party in 2018.
Yeah.
And then in 2020, we have a very unique situation, but it still wasn't as seamlessly is completely Trump's party as it is in 2024. You've got 4 years of the Biden administration that kind of solidify the people on the opposing side. And so over these past couple of years and over the course of this campaign, I think that you've seen them really come together in the most effective way possible, and you're seeing some of that play out now, and it may play out for the rest of the night when we are examining all the final results tomorrow.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit earlier. There's been some discussions in the studio about it, but this early voting push by Republicans and finally getting Republicans to embrace early voting, this is something that, Jeff, 4 years ago, if you told Republicans to vote early, there would be plenty of individuals that would say, well, I'm not going to vote early because that allows some sort of chicanery to go on. And I don't trust that, so I'm going to wait until 7:25 p.m. to vote. That has seemingly evaporated in a relatively short amount of time, and to the Republican success, I would venture to say.
Yeah, and to their planning, they realized after 20 especially that this isn't something that you can take for granted. We have more than 2 weeks of early voting in North Carolina. You've got lots of early voting all around the country. You've got absentee ballots. These are areas where votes are going to be cast, and you best be taking advantage of getting votes in your favor in those categories. So the RNC launched a big Bank Your Vote effort. You had President Trump himself really impressing upon his supporters to get out there and vote early. It was a much different tune in 20.
Well, yeah, I mean,
there's a shift toward the acceptance of early voting as a necessity, and maybe even an excitement after this year's performance by Republicans in North Carolina in particular to vote early.
We talked about this last hour, but just to highlight again what Republicans, not only Trump, but Republicans statewide had to overcome in 2020. Joe Biden was up 216,705 votes with early voting and mail in 2020. So it'd be like starting a football game down 30-0, Jeff. I mean, that's a huge margin that you've got to make up. And I think a lot of Republicans are probably grateful now that they're in a situation where they don't have to make up all of these votes. They can start on somewhat of a level playing field when Election Day rolls around. I mean, talk about demoralizing. You see the early vote come in and you're down 10, 12, 15%.
Yeah. And Republicans grew accustomed to that. So they knew, like, we have to turn in a strong Election Day performance.
Sure.
But it actually kind of muddled things because you could see long lines and strong Republican turnout during Election Day, and Republicans may feel really pretty good about that, like many Republicans did as they were waiting in long lines in 2020. But then you factor in some of those other voting categories, and they were losing it this time around. Did not have to start so far back to make that catch up, and so you have more of a 50-50 race coming in now. We've got early results coming in that should further shape some of these races. I think some of them are shaping up already. I believe some of the larger outlets are calling a couple of races here in North Carolina, but still too early to tell, really, as we wait for all the bulk of the numbers to come through to see where some of these statewide races are gonna play out. But if I'm a Republican in 2024 after this early voting period, I feel the best I could possibly be. If you're going to write down a script about what position you would want to be in at the end of early voting, I think this is what a Republican would choose to be. And Democrats certainly wouldn't choose to be even or slightly down in early voting heading into Election Day.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking at these totals. Again, they are early, but we're at about 516,000 votes in. That includes about 90 precincts. To note, out of over 2,600 precincts in all 100 counties across the state, and it's the race right now between Trump and Harris at the top of the ticket is only separated by 20,000 votes. So this is obviously going to move around a lot. I know it's not North Carolina focused, but it kind of goes on this conversation. Getting some reports out of Loudoun County, Virginia, which is a huge Democrat stronghold. Joe Biden won about 63% of that vote in 2020. Harris is in the mid-50s right now. So maybe that lends itself to what we've been talking about today with this huge Republican turnout and some of the enthusiasm for that.
And it's a shift. And if you remember, Loudoun County was the kind of the epicenter of the cultural battle that we were fighting.
Absolutely.
Where you have some of the LGBTQ and transgender issues and some of the policies that became national news out of Loudoun County, and the responses of the school boards and some of the administrators there that really generated a lot of attention and a lot of blowback. And so you may be seeing some of the actual blowback come in the form of these votes and less support for the Democratic candidate there.
Do you think, all right, I'm going to ask you on the spot, late night or early night based on what we're seeing right now, how do you think things shake out in the next little bit?
For North Carolina?
Yeah.
Or for North Carolina, I think will be relatively early versus other states.
All right, excellent. Jeff Moore joins us here in our Carolina Journal newsroom, continuing to track early voting election results popping in now on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel's election night coverage. We'll throw it back to Donna King in the studio with more. Donna.
That this is going to be an early night because we're already seeing a few things. Let's go to my computer here and I'll share with you the dashboard on the North Carolina State Board of Elections website. What we're seeing right now are some of these federal races. Mitch, tell me what you're seeing.
Well, we have about 500,000 of the votes already counted by now, and it's interesting that after we saw a very early set of numbers that were way in the direction of Democrats, now it's getting a little bit more toward the 50-50, 51-49 state that we're used to seeing. You look at the presidential race the last time I refreshed, it may have changed by that point, but the last time I refreshed it was 51-47 in favor of Kamala Harris, with Donald Trump making some gains. And then if you look at the congressional races, the expectation is that we will have 10 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and then this one hotly contested Congressional District 1 race between incumbent Don Davis and Lori Buckout. Last time I had looked, Davis was at about 60%, but that was still, as we said, with a very heavy Democratic lean to these numbers. With the rest of the races, if folks scroll down their screen or look as Donna is scrolling down her screen, in most of the rest of the races, the people that you would expect to win are leading. There are some exceptions. If you look at the District 8 race, where this is a Republican-leaning district and Mark Harris is the Republican candidate. Last time I looked, he was still down, but things were moving in his direction. Otherwise, you had in the race for District 13, which is expected to go to the Republican Brad Knott, was down, and in District 14, which the race that's supposed to go to current State House Speaker Tim Moore, he was down. But otherwise, things were looking like they were getting more toward what we expect. And so it'll be interesting to see how that District 1 race changes as more of these numbers come in.
Absolutely. And it's important to note right now we have 2.2% of precincts reporting. So most of that, a lot of that is we've probably got all of the mail-in ballots, which is more often Democrat dominated. We're starting to see some of those early voter numbers coming in, but we're really not seeing those strong Republican counties. Johnston, Union, those counties really aren't reporting anything yet. So to have the numbers look like this right now, I think it might end up being an early night. But let's go to somebody who may know. Joining us now with Signal Polling. We've been putting out polling here on Carolina Journal throughout the year, certainly a lot over the last few months, of course. Brock McCleary joining us here from Signal Polling. Good evening, Brock. It's great to see you.
Good evening. Happy to be with you tonight.
Great, great. Well, tell me what you're looking for as you look at some of these numbers, these early numbers, and knowing what you know, that sort of inside track that you have in what the polling numbers look like for North Carolina.
Yeah, well, we're sort of still in this phase where there's some anecdotal results in different parts of the country that seem to tell a little bit of different story. You know, Boone County in Indiana moved towards Harris, but you know, as Nick pointed out, Loudoun County moving by about 8% towards Trump is a pretty good indicator. I think in Florida, where the state has been called, but what I think could be important elsewhere is that we saw that Trump's margin is growing in counties that have heavier African-American population. It's actually growing to a lesser degree in more white populated areas, but in more African-American areas, Trump's margin is improving. And, you know, that could be relevant, of course, in North Carolina, in Georgia, and some other places could be a real difference maker.
All right, so tell me what's going to be those bellwethers for you in North Carolina here, from what you know.
Yeah, I think we look at Cumberland, New Hanover, and Onslow as key counties where, you know, Cumberland, we look at kind of 16 results, the 20 results, and the 22 midterm results. And, you know, Cumberland County, Republicans lost by 16%, or Trump lost by 16%, then 17%, but improved in 22 in the midterm. New Hanover, of course, was a was a Clinton +2, then it was Trump +4, then in the midterms, New Hanover goes back to +2 for Democrats. And Onslow is really just a matter of, can the strength that it was exhibited in 16 but wasn't in 20, can that bear itself out? And so a couple of those counties we're kind of tracking closely, but looking at some of these races, and it looks like there are some places where, if you're looking at how Republicans or Democrats are performing relative to other candidates on the ticket, Republicans are probably feeling pretty good about the treasurer, ag commissioner, labor. I think insurance commissioner and auditor are perhaps a little more up in the air, but I think early signs are good on those fronts. And the governor's race kind of quickly went the way that we anticipated that. But what's important there, I think, is, again, just looking at some of the superficial results, and we're just kind of reading tea leaves at this point, but Stein is only overperforming the Democratic vote by about 5% relative to his ticket mates, whereas Robinson is underperforming by about 10%. So it seems like what will most drive the outcome on the disparity on the gubernatorial race would be the Republican, underperformance for Robinson.
Brock, it seems that some people have said if Trump wins by 2 or if Trump wins by 3, that's good news for, other than Mark Robinson, the rest of the Republicans on the statewide ballot. Is that in line, or do you have a different number that you're looking at for a Trump victory that would help spell wins for Republicans down ballot?
I think there are races where it is critical that Trump do well to drive turnout, but we also know that there are places where Republicans are going to outperform and do better than the top of the ticket. And so I think that it is, in some cases, Trump needs to create enough headroom for some of our candidates to be able to get across that 50% threshold. In other cases, we're going to have we'll have some overperformers, I believe. I think we have some down ballot races, and this is becoming increasingly more common, is to have some places in the ticket where we have some genuine overperformance by a Republican or Democrat, and we have some weaknesses in the tickets where, things, sticking true to North Carolina's brand, a lot of unaffiliated swing voters.
Sure. One of the things that we've talked about over the last, 3 cycles, I guess, 3 or 4 cycles, is that shy Trump voter. Do you feel like you've been able to calibrate polls to accommodate that? Because it seems like, particularly among men, that Trump voter may not be the one interested in answering a poll.
Well, that's exactly right. The Trump coalition, which is formed and is growing among younger males, particularly working class males, are those who are hardest to get to take surveys. And so there is certainly the possibility that some of the Trump vote is undervalued in the polling. I think a lot has been improved from 16 in terms of trying to get education and some things in the electorate correct this time that it wasn't last. But I think that the underperformance perhaps is what national polls were showing going into this race, that they seem to have modest sort of optimism for Trump, and a lot of the early numbers would suggest that the night may well go better than that.
Sure.
One thing that's interesting to me in the poll that we do is we ask about the generic ballot for congressional and legislative races, and of course people don't vote generically, they vote for particular candidates. But as a pollster, how do you look at that number and help apply that to what actually happens on the ground?
It is hard because there are races where there is a lot happening around a legislative race or a congressional race in a district, and then in a neighboring district there is less so. I mean, I think in the case of our last survey, what we saw is that on a federal level, independents were looking better, and in the Raleigh media market, things were looking better for Republicans, and so there was a little bit of disparity there just on the margins of the electorate. I think that the difference can sometimes be telling, but increasingly generic ballots nationally and then the state are really good at showing trend lines in terms of who's building momentum, but are sometimes difficult to, extrapolate when you've only got a handful of races and all of the energy and all of the money is being spent in those. There's a different political environment happening with voters there than there may be in a neighboring district.
Sure, sure. All right, so we also talk a lot about the top issues that are really important to folks. We're finding that the biggest issues were, the economy and immigration. But as we got a little closer, some of those things Democrats are really hounding and really hitting on a lot. Things like democracy and abortion and those things. What are you seeing nationally where North Carolina is sort of in step with those key issues that people took with them into the voting booth?
Yeah, we are seeing nationally also a surge in voters telling us that this threats to democracy is a primary issue. We're doing some exit polling, and I think we're on our third report of the day, and we have seen that threats to democracy is increasing as a priority. Whereas, abortion was a really heavy focus of Democratic messaging early and in key races to really define those. But nationally, it seems like Democrats have really tried to, kind of bring the campaign in for a landing on this argument against Trump that, it represents a threat to democracy. And so I don't know that it's going to be indicative of good things or bad things for Democrats, because if you look at our polling, you see that inflation and cost of living concerns are what voters tell us is going to be their deciding issue.
Absolutely. Brock McCleary from Signal, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We will certainly have a new poll coming out from you and Carolina Journal coming up after we have all the results to see, how happy people are with what we find by the end of the evening. Brock, thanks so much. Have a great night. All right, now, speaking of that sort of trend line, if we can go back to the dashboard here for just a second before we head over to the newsroom. If you look at the North Carolina State Board of Elections.gov, they have a dashboard there. We've already seen now, we've got 11.6% of precincts reporting, and we've got Kamala Harris leading by just one point right now here in North Carolina. So this might be an earlier night than we're expecting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. We heard earlier that switch over from the Democratic candidate to Trump happened about 10 o'clock last time around.
It's 8:32, yeah.
If it's going to happen much earlier than that, that could be good news for Republicans.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's check in here with Nick Craig in the newsroom, standing by with Jeff. Oh, actually, no, we've got Nick Craig standing by with David Larson. Is it Jeff and David? I think it's Jeff and David out there in the newsroom.
Hey Donna, no, it's Nick and David. We got you as we're tracking through all of our coverage tonight. The power of Congress is going to be an important one, regardless of who wins the presidential race. Obviously, here in North Carolina, things are way too early to tell right now. We're continuing to track those details as they come in. But if Trump is successful in the election tonight, he's going to need a Republican House and Republican Senate to get his agenda done. If Kamala Harris is successful, she would obviously like a Democrat House and Senate. If either candidate wins, they don't want the opposite party controlling. What's the relevancy of that here in North Carolina, right? Just one really swing toss-up district in the state.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, lots on the line, I guess. There's no U.S. Senate races really up this time. There are other key ones, obviously, but for North Carolina, we will have a big impact on kind of the picture for the U.S. House. So, as you said, there's one swing district, which obviously way too early to tell what's going to happen there. Sure. But just to give you a picture of just how close everything is in terms of the U.S. House, the Republicans have a majority there, 221 to 214. So if just 4 U.S. House seats flip from Republican to Democrat, that's enough to switch the majority. And so, us having here in North Carolina 1 seat that's a swing is something that people are watching at the national level. But also just maybe a victory that happened for the Republicans a little further back, but it's going to be noticed in this picture is the fact that we're going from a 7-7 map that had been kind of court imposed by a Democrat Supreme Court.
Redistricting, yeah.
And redistricting. So it was 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. And now the new map we're going to be under now looks like 10-3, 10 Republicans to 3 Democrats, plus this swing district.
Oh, absolutely. And you talked about that slim margin. We saw that play out in real time for a long period of time when it came to finding the next Speaker of the House, with now Speaker Mike Johnson. That went on for days at a time, and Republicans had such a thin margin that just a couple of Republicans that said, no, I'm not going to support Speaker X, Y, or Z, were able to drag that process on for weeks at a time. So this thin margin is a really big deal in Congress.
A couple of the people who played a major role in that actually happen to be Congress people from North Carolina. So Richard Hudson, he was kind of a kingmaker, as well as Patrick McHenry.
Banging the gavel.
Banging the gavel. He's iconic pictures with him in his bow tie. And so he actually will not be running. He isn't running for re-election. So that's one of those that isn't a pickup. It's going to be going from one Republican to another. But there are quite a lot of new faces in the picture. So as I said, there'll be 3, if you're setting aside that swing district, going from 7 Republicans to 10, there are three districts that went from having pretty strong Democrat districts. So there was a triad one that Representative Kathy Manning had. She declined to run for that because it was kind of overwhelmingly, it was clear that it was going to be a Republican district. So Addison McDowell, he's already declaring victory actually on Twitter. So and then there's 2 others, one in Charlotte where Jeff Jackson, he saw that it wasn't going to go his way, so he decided to run for Attorney General.
That district became much more likely to favor a Republican.
Exactly, and that one might hurt the most because the person taking his place is the current North Carolina GOP House Speaker, Tim Moore. So he's also in a very comfortable district and can likely declare victory already. And yeah, the other one, I guess, there's a third one. Well, Brad Knott in NC-13, also a similar picture where he probably doesn't have too much worry about what's going to happen. That's North Carolina 13, kind of in this Raleigh area, the excerpts going around the city. And Wiley Nickel, who had that also, didn't think it was worth trying to run in that district.
We'll jump back to that in a second. I just want to give folks an update. We are getting some new details from the State Board of Elections. We're just shy of about 1 million votes being in so far. It's 12.18% of the vote. And for the first time this evening, we're now seeing former President Trump with a lead. He's up about 40,000 votes. Now, again, as we've been saying all night, still early, but as more of these numbers begin to trickle in, the picture will start being painted a little bit better. In comparison, we talked about that first congressional district. Incumbent Don Davis, the Democrat, currently has a 10-point lead in that race with these early voting totals. And I'll note that's only 40 of 281 precincts in that first congressional district. So relatively a very small number as of right now, but these results are flying in by the minute here, and they seem to be continuing to show a shift, at least in some areas, towards Republicans.
And that'll be an important one. The first North Carolina congressional district will also be important to watch in terms of a major demographic that people are watching is the black vote in North Carolina, as well as in Georgia and a couple other states, because when the last time the Democrats won in North Carolina was 2008 with the Obama coalition, and a big part of that was getting the percentage of the electorate that was black voters up to 30 or higher. And in early voting, it was about 17% of the electorate was black voters. So if it continues not to be a huge push, then a huge turnout among the black voters, then that's kind of a bad sign for Democrats. And North Carolina's first district is historically has a large black population, so that's another thing to watch for in turnout in North Carolina's first district.
Well, and we've seen some, at least in the early vote totals in that area, we'd seen suppressed turnout amongst Democrats and about the same turnout for Republicans, which would lend itself. And again, the numbers are still. Every minute we talk, I could say, oh, now this person's leading, now that person's leading. That's not very fruitful. But in terms of just the general enthusiasm and turnout, lower Democrat turnout in District 1 could give them Republicans, in this case Lori Buckout, a huge opportunity to flip that seat.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really tough, as you say, to figure out, read the tea leaves and say, okay, if this precinct is reporting, but it's reporting, 12% and this one's not reporting at all, and it's just tough to tell exactly what that'll mean. But there's certain parts of that district for sure that are demographically more favorable to Democrats, and other ones. The district now is kind of reshaped. So this new version has a few more counties that are further south than had been hugging the Virginia border. So some of those areas I think will probably help to maybe make it more competitive for Republicans than it had been in the past, because they haven't won this, people say, since the 1800s, and I don't really know if that means they did win it at the 1800s or just they've never run it. So it'll be interesting to watch that one for sure. That's kind of the main game for the congressional districts in North Carolina to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of additional precincts reporting in that race out in Congressional District 1. Currently shows Democrat incumbent Don Davis with about an 8,000-point lead, which is about 8 percentage points as of right now. So we'll keep an eye on that throughout the rest of the night as well. David, thanks for the update. Greatly appreciate it. We'll check back in with you briefly.
Absolutely.
All right, Donna, we are continuing to track everything here in our newsroom. These election result totals coming in, as we just mentioned. Trump now leading in the state with some of these Election Day and early voting results coming in. We'll throw it back to you and Mitch in the studio.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting more numbers coming in. Right now, we've got about 13% of precincts reporting. The numbers are now moving more in the direction we were expecting because of the high turnout among Republicans in early voting. You want to give us a quick update here? I've got the dashboard up at the State Board of Elections and some of our Council of State races.
Sure. We're up to about 1.2 million votes cast now, so we're still early, but getting closer to what the final numbers might tell us. And we saw a surge of some Republican votes being counted because Donald Trump, who had been trailing at last report, was now up by 4 points, 51 to 47. But if you look at the Council of State, the big marquee matchup is Josh Stein and Mark Robinson for governor, and Stein still up substantially, 11 points, which is why some media outlets have already been calling this race for Stein based on their exit polling. But if you look at every other Council of State race, and we're talking about all 10 of the statewide executive branch offices, lieutenant governor, attorney general, so on and so forth. Republicans are now leading them all, including the Secretary of State's race, where Elaine Marshall has been the long-time person serving in that job. Also included in that, the open lieutenant governor's race, Hal Weatherman right now with a slight lead, 49 to 48 over Rachel Hunt in an open seat.
All right, we're certainly going to be watching that. We have Brianna Kramer, Carolina Journal reporter. She is out in the field, standing there. We're waiting for more and more of these numbers coming in. Brianna is over at Hal Weatherman's watch party. I know that group there is watching these numbers really closely, hoping for an early night and hoping for a victory. Brianna, tell me what the mood is over there. All right, we'll get Brianna back. We're having some audio issues there. Hal Weatherman is just pulling a little bit ahead. Still, we only have about 13% of our precincts reporting, but he is leading a little bit.
He is, and it's important to note that this could be because of a surge of votes coming in from Republican-leaning counties. I'm not sure that anyone looked at the results and the polling and said, okay, Donald Trump's going to be up by 4. So maybe we get a Republican surge and things will go back toward the Democrats' direction. And if so, that would change some of these Council of State results. But at the last time we looked, other than the governor's race where Josh Stein had a 10, 11-point lead over Mark Robinson, the other Council of State races were all now leaning toward Republicans, including Hal Weatherman with a 49-48 lead over Rachel Hunt.
Sure, it looks like Troxler is up, but he's up by about 117,000 votes. Not a huge surprise. That's one of the ones that whenever you ask somebody, what are your predictions? Everybody says Steve Troxler's going to win.
I was shocked to see a Steve Troxler TV ad because I thought, well, he's a guy who probably doesn't need to run a TV ad, but better safe than sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things I do want to talk a little bit about is our top issues. We mentioned it with Brock just a few minutes ago. What issues were important to you as you went into that voting booth today? We have a snapshot here of what North Carolinians said in October. We always include it with some of our polls, particularly with elections. What are these top issues that are important to you? We gave you lots of options among them. We have inflation and prices. We have abortion. If we've got a shot of that slide we could put up. Abortion moved steadily. The numbers didn't change, but certainly moved up in the order over the course of this year. But inflation and prices really seem to stay in that top spot for North Carolina voters.
Yes, and if you combine inflation and prices with jobs and economy, that certainly was the plurality leader. And that goes back to the old James Carville line, it's the economy, stupid. Sure. No matter what else is on voters' minds, that tends to be the thing that they focus on the most. And if that's true this time around, that's good news for Republicans, because whether it's good or bad, the administration that's in charge gets blamed when people don't like what's happening with the economy.
Sure, sure.
So I think in this case, you could probably say that the Biden administration deserves some blame, because they threw so much stimulus in as soon as they took office, right after Trump had done stimulus. Sure. So there's so many more dollars chasing the same amount of goods. That almost always leads to inflation, and people saw those impacts on their wallets. Inflation was running so high for so long. Now the inflation rate has gone down, but inflation is still going up, and the prices never went back down. They just stopped growing as much. So if people are looking at that and seeing that that is their major issue, that's bad news for Democrats, good news for Republicans, whatever else they're thinking about other issues.
Sure, sure. They're still saying, if you're looking at other channels while you're watching with us, they're still calling North Carolina too close to call right now in the presidential race. We're going to be watching it really closely. We have Brianna now, I think. She's over there at Hal Weatherman's watch party. Know that it's exciting to be out in the field on a night like this, right?
Oh, yeah.
And really feel what's going on there. Brianna, can you hear me? I see you there. Tell me what the mood is there at Weatherman's watch party. All right. We'll give it a try a little later in the evening. Good. All right. So we're going to actually stop for a minute and check in over there in the newsroom and see. We've got Teresa Opeka is kind of standing by there in just a few minutes to talk about the Council of State races. Now, first explain the Council of State for me, because I think a lot of folks who maybe aren't the big, politicos and follow this every day, Council of State is a key position in North Carolina. Yes,
and there is actually positions. It's a council. Sure. So, and if you're new to North Carolina, this is something you might not be used to. We elect 10 statewide executive branch offices: governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, things you might be used to voting for, but also commissioner of agriculture, superintendent of public instruction, insurance commissioner. There are all kinds of races. There are 10 of them. Right now, Republicans hold a 6-4 majority, but almost all of the people who are running in these races are new to the offices. We only have the incumbent insurance commissioner, ag commissioner, and secretary of state running for re-election. In all of the rest of these races, someone's going to be new. So it's very interesting.
Sure, and in addition to running major divisions of North Carolina state government, they provide a counsel to the governor.
That's right, and in some cases, they have to vote on things that the governor wants to do, including now because of some changes in state law when there's an emergency. If the governor wants to declare an emergency, he or she can declare that emergency for a very short period of time. If they want it to extend much longer than a couple of days or so, they have to get the input from the Council of State, and then at some point they have to get the input from the General Assembly. So that Council of State does have a major role, not only in running departments, but also serving as somewhat of a check on the governor.
But that's a new law, right?
The terms of the emergency, yes, that's something that came about because of COVID. People said, wait a minute, this emergency's been going on too long. We shouldn't have just one person saying that we're going to be under a state of emergency. So that was a change that was made to say the Council of State has to have buy-in, has to be clear, and then after a certain amount of time, the General Assembly has to sign off on an emergency as well.
All right, good. Laying the groundwork. Really, really important roles. Let's head over to Teresa Opeka and Nick Craig in the newsroom. Talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing in those critical races.
Hey, Donna. Good evening, Mitch. Thanks, guys. Here with Teresa as we're looking at the all-important Council of State. And Teresa, before we get into any specific races, safe to say that there's going to be many new faces on the Council of State. There's a couple of incumbents that have decided not to run. They're not going to be part of this election cycle. What are some of the Council of State races that you're watching as we see some of these early vote totals coming in right now?
Sure. So among the big ones is for Attorney General. We've got 2 congressmen.
Both out of the Charlotte area, too.
Yes, right? Yes, they are vying for that. We've got Dan Bishop, the Republican, versus Jeff Jackson, Democrat. Right now, it looks like as about 518 of over of the 2,600 precincts reporting. Bishop is leading with 50.91% versus Jackson's 49.09%. A little technical there, but
sure.
But it's close right now. But before when they first started counting votes, Jackson was on top. So,
yeah. And we're even seeing that, looking, of course, at the top of the ticket with the presidential race.
Yes.
Trump's margin continues to grow as we've got about 20% of the Election Day precincts that are reporting in right now. Keeping our attention and our focus on Council of State, what are some of the other races that you're tracking this afternoon?
Sure. So we're looking at auditor.
That's a big one.
Yeah. So, of course, we have Jessica Holmes, who was appointed to the office last December when Beth Wood had to step down and resign. Right now, she is losing to Dave Bullock. Again, this is still early. Still, early in the game. Okay. Bullock has got a little over 52% versus Jessica's 44.9, so 45%. So he's on top at the moment. And he's had a lot of positions in finance and has a long history with that kind of a background. So it's an interesting race to see. And also, we should not count out the Libertarian, Bob Drack. He is also in the race with a little over 3%.
I'm glad you bring that up, and the likelihood is the Libertarian is not going to be successful in this race in particular. But when you look at these two-way contests, somebody like a third-party candidate can be, I guess, what you describe as a ballot buster, depending on how close some of these margins. And in the most recent Carolina Journal poll back that was out on the 17th of last month, it showed a statistical tie in a race like this.
Right.
So as we look right now, you've got the Libertarian with about 40,000 votes.
Right.
There's a possibility this race is decided by less than that.
No, that's correct. That's correct. It could be like you say, spoiler.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's detracting from maybe Jessica Holmes right now is what we're looking at. So yeah, most definitely.
Let's talk about Ag Commissioner. The state fair wrapped up last week. Steve Troxler, that's his baby. He's running in that contest once again. What are some of the election results look like for that race? Not only, of course, is the state fair important, agriculture, the number one industry here in North Carolina.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So right now, not really too big of a surprise. He is leading with about 55% to Democrat Sarah Tabor, and it looks like she's got a little over 42%. Again, I mentioned the Libertarian, Sean Haw, has got about 32,000 votes with a little over 2% of the vote. So, yeah, he's the most safe bet, I would think, on the Council of State. Everybody really, truly likes him. You say he's the fair. He's always talking about the fair at the Council of State meetings.
Sure.
People always have associated really good times with the fair and agriculture, and he's been not, controversial, maybe as some other candidates have been.
The current state treasurer in Dale Folwell ran in the Republican primary to be governor. He was unsuccessful in that primary bid. With that, he decided not to run for state treasurer once again. So there will be a new treasurer in that office. Right. Who are the two candidates in that race, and what are the results looking like right now?
Sure. So right now we've got Wesley Harris, who is he's a representative in the legislature, and Brad Briner. He's a newcomer to running in the elections. He's got a financial background. I think he actually worked for Bloomberg at one point in New York. He is leading right now, a little over 55% of the vote to Wesley Harris's 44% of the vote.
There's only a couple of other Council of State races. What are some of those other ones that you're looking at as well?
Sure. So we've got Commissioner of Insurance, and that's an
incumbent in that seat, right?
Yeah, Mike Causey, Republican. He's been there for quite a while. He's leading right now with 55% with Natasha Marcus, a Democrat. state senator from Mecklenburg County. She has got 44% at this point. So yeah, and she calls him Rate Hike Mike. She likes to give him a nickname.
That's insurance rates have been a big controversy over the last couple of years.
For everybody.
Teresa, thanks for the update on the Council of State. We're continuing to track those details. Like we did at the top of last hour, we're going to take a quick break here, reset, get everything ready for the 9 o'clock hour as we continue to watch election results coming in. Thanks for making us a part of your night. You're continuing watching our Carolina Journal election night coverage right here on the Carolina Journal YouTube channel.
All right, we're going to be coming right back in just a moment, but first, got Brianna, but you have an update.
Couple of things. The Associated Press has called North Carolina's governor's race for Attorney General Josh Stein, the Democratic nominee. We had told you that some other media outlets had already done that. Now the Associated Press calling that race. We also know that the constitutional amendment for citizens-only voting has been called as victorious. That not a surprise. It's been leading by substantial margins throughout the evening. The last time I checked, 79% support. One of the people who has been leading most recently now in races is Hal Weatherman, who is the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, an open seat running against Rachel Hunt. And we've been checking in with Brianna Kramer, who is our Carolina Journal reporter on the scene at the Hal Weatherman Watch Party. And we want to know what things are happening for Brianna as she's watching what's going on with the Weatherman Watch Party.
All right, well, now we're having trouble hearing Brianna. All right, we'll come on back to her in just a little bit. Yeah, this is just one of those things with live. Oh, she's back. Great. All right.
Well, she definitely looks happy out there. So we'll get a report from Brianna at some point here, but obviously we're having a few technical difficulties.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. We're going to get reset, and we'll be going into the next hour, and I think we're going to see some big results coming out in this next hour because this feels like a much earlier evening than I was expecting.
It is, and if we looked at that presidential race, I think we saw at one point Donald Trump with a 10-point lead. It's not going to be a 10-point lead, so we've seen some sort of red surge that's going to come back a little bit more blue as the evening goes on. But so far, good news for Republicans.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Stay with us. Hi, and welcome to the 9 o'clock hour of Carolina Journal's Election 2024 coverage. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. We've got our whole team bringing lots of results to you. Things are starting to heat up.
I'm Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst for the John Locke Foundation. And Donna, you're exactly right. We're starting to get some serious numbers here in this race. We can tell you that the Associated Press has already called the North Carolina governor's race for the Democratic candidate, Attorney General Josh Stein, in his race against Republican Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor. We're going to get to some of those Council of State numbers in just a bit. But first, I know that you want to call up the dashboard from the North Carolina State Board of Elections. And we're going to start with federal races because the big race on the ballot in North Carolina, of course, is the race for president and our state's 16 electoral votes. It's seen that Donald Trump probably needs to have those 16 electoral votes to help him win the overall race against Kamala Harris. And if you look at the latest numbers, I'll go ahead and refresh it on my screen too, just so we have the latest ones. With 2.3 million votes at this point, Donald Trump is leading with 51.75% of the vote to just under 47% for Kamala Harris. So almost 5 percentage points. I'm not sure that lead is going to hold, but if it's 3 points or more, that's really good news for Republicans up and down the ballot. While we're on the federal screen there, so far the races are going for Congress as you'd expect. The races that are supposed to go to Republicans are leading. The races that are supposed to go to Democrats, those are going as you'd expect. But the one competitive race, Congressional District 1, right now, Don Davis, the incumbent Democrat, has a lead with 52% of the vote against the Republican challenger, Lori Buckout, with 45%. We're going to jump now over to the Council of State, which is the race for all of the statewide executive branch officials in North Carolina. And as we've said a couple of times now, the Associated Press has called the governor's race for Josh Stein, who is the Democratic nominee, the Attorney General, and he has, at last report, a 13-point lead over Mark Robinson, 54-41. Looking at some of the other races for the Council of State, you have Hal Weatherman with a very slight lead over Rachel Hunt for Lieutenant Governor, just about 1/10 of a percentage point. Jeff Jackson, the Democrat, a slight lead for Attorney General. Dave Bullock with about a almost 4-point lead for Auditor. He's the Republican. Commissioner of Agriculture, Steve Troxler, now up to 9, almost 10 points in his race. Mike Causey with more than a 6-point lead in the Insurance Commissioner's race. Luke Farley now with 7-point lead in the Labor Commissioner's race. Elaine Marshall, kind of a small lead, 50.12% to 49.88% for Chad Brown and Secretary of State. Superintendent of Public Instruction, another tight one, Democrat Mo Green with the lead of 50.2% to 49.8%. And for Treasurer, Brad Briner, the Republican, with a almost 7-point lead. So we know that one of the things that we've been doing during the course of our last half hour or so has been trying to get Brianna Kramer.
We're going a little bit old school this time.
Brianna Kramer, who's at the watch party for Hal Weatherman, who is the Republican candidate for Lieutenant Governor, hoping to succeed Mark Robinson in that position. And we know that Brianna is on the scene.
We're going a little old school here.
I'm talking to her. Donna's talking to her. Donna, why don't you toss it to her?
All right, Brianna, you're at Hal Weatherman's party. Tell us what's going on.
All right, I hope the third time's a charm. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. All right, good. Yes, here at Hal Weatherman's watch party, things are exciting around here. There's a lot of people kind of anticipating, watching inside, and we've got people outside too. Hal Weatherman's bus is behind me. We're up here in Wake Forest. Lots going on. I even got a volunteer who wants to talk. This is Daniel Lancaster. He's a volunteer for the Hal Weatherman campaign. How's everybody feeling tonight?
Everybody's feeling good. We're expecting for him to win a big landslide.
Okay, good. And what happened yesterday, as you were doing the final day of campaigning? What was going on with the campaign?
We saw a lot of positive results come back in. A lot of people are eager to vote for him, and they're just ready to have a change.
Yeah.
And fix the state up.
Okay. And what is the mood like tonight inside? I know you're running around, working, doing a lot, but how is everybody feeling?
Well, they're feeling good.
Okay.
I'm feeling energetic, and they're just excited for tonight.
Okay. And do you expect it to be a long night, or do you think it's going to come in the results in the next couple hours or so? What's everybody thinking?
Probably in the next 4 hours, we should get results.
Okay. So it might be a long night for everybody
I
here.
think so.
All right. Well, thank you so much
All
for
right,
taking the time to interview them. All right, back to you guys, Donna.
All right, thanks so much, Brianna. I appreciate it. We'll check back with you in just a little bit. I know you're going to head over to the big Wake GOP party. Should see a lot more Council of State candidates there. Okay, so we've got a lot of numbers really starting to come in now. We're going to be hearing more from a lot of our experts and a lot of our reporters here on Carolina Journal, and they're watching those races.
And I'm looking forward to, in just a matter of minutes, I think we're going to be going back to Nick in the newsroom, Nick Craig, who will be talking to Jessica Thompson, who is our woman at the General Assembly. She's the one who's keeping up to date on things for the John Locke Foundation. Of course, Brianna, Katie Zender are spending a lot of their time covering the General Assembly. Jessica Thompson is there working for the John Locke Foundation on the issues that are important to the think tank. So she has to keep a lot of track on what's going on with the legislative races. So I think she'll have some interesting insights there. That'll be coming up very shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to that, because one of the things that we do have to keep in mind here is that we're part of the John Locke Foundation, and that is something that Jessica is working on. So let's go over there. Nick Craig joining us there in the newsroom with Jessica. Tell me what you think about how tonight's election will really impact public policy for North Carolina.
I'm here with Jessica in the newsroom. Donna, thanks. So the question is, how will tonight's election, obviously starting at the top of the ticket, presidential-wise and all the way down, how will that affect public policy, I guess not only at the national level, but potentially here in North Carolina?
Oh, wow. This election is going to have a huge role in how policy is shaped at the state level, especially where Locke is so focused. Not only the governor's race, which we're pretty sure that we know the result of, but the legislature is king. That is the design of our state constitution, is for the legislature to hold most of the policy-making power in North Carolina. And so currently Republicans have a supermajority in the North Carolina General Assembly, but that is up for grabs in this election. And so how that shakes out is going to make a big difference in the policies that we see over the coming 2 years.
Well, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. The Associated Press and I think every other news outlet has called the race for Josh Stein. He will be the next governor, Democrat governor here in the state. So the Republicans holding control of the supermajority is really probably the only way anything gets done in the state for the next 2 years until the next General Assembly election, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of the things that Republicans want to do that they need to retain that supermajority for. You will see them curbing back their agenda a lot if they do not retain that supermajority, because they'll be reliant on Democrats crossing the aisle to support policies or working with Stein to work out legislation that he wouldn't veto.
Well, and that's an important thing to note, and it would be we'd be having the same discussion if it was on the other side, and Democrats were potentially looking at a supermajority. If they weren't able to do that, they would have to work with some more maybe middle of the road Republicans to get anything done. That makes North Carolina a very interesting state.
Absolutely, and I think also the way that North Carolinians are willing to vote Republican for one office and vote Democrat for one office. And so that really makes a lot of our North Carolina legislature races exciting to watch, because just the presidential ticket and the gubernatorial ticket does not tell us how the state legislature offices would pan out.
Well, speaking of policy, we heard some comments back a couple of weeks ago from Josh Stein that he is not in favor of the Opportunity Scholarship Program. That's been a huge policy issue for Republicans. It looks like he's set to be the next governor. You go to the current governor's website, Roy Cooper's website, and the top banner says there's a public school emergency going on. Do you think that discussion is going to go anywhere anytime soon, or is that likely to remain regardless of what the results are tonight?
Oh, well, this is a huge issue, and it will continue to be a huge issue. The General Assembly in 2023 fully open and universalized opportunity scholarships so that all parents and children can take advantage of that scholarship to attend private schools. But it took, in 2024, they had to come back and provide more funding in the short session, and Governor Cooper has vetoed that bill. And so the legislature is going to have to take that up and do a veto override if the students who have already enrolled and qualified for the program are actually going to receive that funding. And now, unfortunately, the Opportunity Scholarship funding is not under a mechanism so that it is reoccurring budget item. And that is another fight that we hope the General Assembly will take up so that the promise isn't an empty promise, and that when they say universally all students are eligible for the scholarship to go to private schools, they'll actually be able to receive funds to attend those private schools. And so that's going to continue to be a hot debate as we head into 2025 in the long session.
What are some of those other large public policy discussions and debates that are going to likely continue? The new General Assembly will be sworn in late December. They'll be back in January. A new House Speaker is going to come forward. What are some of the other things that you're tracking over on the John Locke Foundation side?
Sure. So we are watching, as always, the budget, especially with the Western North Carolina and Hurricane Helene incident out there. The Office of Recovery and Resilience under Governor Cooper has poorly managed their funds for hurricanes even before Hurricane Helene came in.
You have people from Hurricane Florence that still are not in their homes.
Exactly.
That storm was in 2017.
And so the legislature is absolutely going to be doing a lot of oversight over that office, over the governor's office, and how they expend emergency relief funds to make sure that our citizens are protected whenever these type of events happen.
Absolutely. There's a lot that we're going to continue to track on that. Budget has typically been something that is a long, drawn-out thing. We saw 2 years ago, it was, an 8 or 9 month General Assembly session. Do you think we'll see something like that come early January when this new legislature is sworn in and begins?
I think that's a great prediction. Given that Governor Stein is the likely governor, as the AP is called, the Republicans are going to retain a majority at least. It's very possible they'll retain that supermajority, and so I continue to see that budget be a sticking point in the long session.
Absolutely. Jessica, thanks for the time. We're continuing to track election results here. You're watching the Carolina Journal's coverage of Election Night 2024. We are going to throw it back to the studio now with Mitch Kokai and Donna King.
All right, thanks so much, Nick. We are watching these numbers. They are just starting to come in faster and faster. Early night, I think it's going to be. Right now, we got just about 29.6% of precincts reporting. Joining us now, we have, of course, Brooke Medina. I'm Donna King, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal.
I'm Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst at the John Locke Foundation, and I've been looking forward to this piece of our puzzle because you and I have been focusing so much with the Carolina Journal team on what's happening in North Carolina. Sure. But some of the people who are watching this are saying, yeah, that's all well and good. What's happening nationally? Right. We know Brooke's been keeping an eye on that. And so, Brooke, what has been catching your attention?
Yeah, so all eyes are on Pennsylvania. Former President Trump has said that that is an essential state that he needs for a very clear path to victory. He'll feel very good about that. Harris is, of course, up in Pennsylvania right now. That's no surprise at the moment. I believe about 19% of their precincts have been reporting so far. So there's still a ways to go. Though I would say compared to 2020, what we're seeing are that there has been a shift red nationally compared to 2020. So I think that might be indicative of how this night proceeds. Of course, we're still waiting on certain swing states, polling places to close, such as Arizona, Wisconsin. So the night is still young, y'all. But that's what we're seeing right now. So if you go to New York Times website, which interestingly, their tech workers are on strike right now over some stuff, but nonetheless, their website seems to be working. And they are projecting right now, estimating about 281 electoral votes for President Trump, former President Trump, which, of course, you need 270 to win. So this should be interesting to see how this evening plays out. But right now, I would say the Trump campaign is probably cautiously optimistic, but a lot of this is going to ride on states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, North Carolina. We're well aware how that's going right now.
Of course, North Carolina, of course, being a key swing state, and we've been talking about this. I think we have either Harris or Trump here every couple couple of days. It feels like the path to victory, from what my understanding is that he really needs those Sun Belt states. He needs to get Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and then needs to pick up what they call a blue wall state, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. You know, I'm hearing that he felt like he really had some traction in Pennsylvania. Harris up right now. Some of those votes still due to be called, and you're right. In Michigan, Wisconsin, with the time zone change, it's still an early night. But Harris's path to victory is to get all those blue wall states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and then pick up a Sun Belt state. Got to pick up North Carolina, which may or may not happen. It's looking like it's trending in Donald Trump's direction right now.
Yeah, and she doesn't have to win North Carolina. If she won all of the states that Biden won, she would win.
Sure.
But North Carolina certainly would be a huge prize for her, and it would help if she lost something else. Brooke, you've been watching this stuff very closely. After you leave your chat with us, what are you going to be keeping your eye on?
I'm very interested in seeing those results coming out of Arizona, I think, as well as Nevada. Michigan's going to be very important. So yes, if Trump can pick up a Rust Belt state that's in play, I think that's going to be essential. But again, like if you just look at the map compared to 2020, you're seeing some positive trends towards Republicans. If you're a Republican, I think you're going to be encouraged by that. But it's anybody's game still.
It is. You spend a lot of time with public policy experts across the country, and they're all watching these races because, you know, the public policy really impacts us at home. And I think a lot of people don't really realize how much the decisions our lawmakers make impact our kitchen table, impact our jobs and our children's education and everything else. What are you looking for in public policy from the next administration, whoever it is?
When I talk with the everyday voter, someone who's not in this wonky space that we exist in, they just want to be able to pay for groceries. They want to be able to get to work, to get their kids back and forth to practices, afford fuel, afford housing. That's what they care about. And so no matter what either side wants to do as far as the cultural hot button issue of the day, what really matters is can North Carolinians, can Americans pay for food? Can they pay for gas? And so I think that's what I'm going to be watching, because that's where the conversation is going to pivot. And whoever wins the White House and all of these other races, that's what they're really going to be held accountable for at the end of the day. That's what voters will remember.
Brooke's a little bit younger than us, but you and I certainly remember, and you probably remember as a younger person, that one of the big things in an election years ago was James Carville saying, it's the economy, stupid. That with all of the other things going on in an election, if the economy is not doing well, it tends to be something that drives people to the polls and hurts the party that's in power.
Yeah, so no matter how much Harris has tried to distance herself from Biden's economy, her often repeated talking point lately has been, we don't want to keep going back to the past. And most voters are thinking of the very recent past of the bills they're paying right now. And so I don't know. I don't think that's going to ring very well and land well with voters because, no matter what decade you're in, the economy still speaks loud and clear. And I think that's what voters have in mind when they're going to the polling place today.
Well, I mean, let's talk about messaging. You are clearly a messaging expert. That's what you do here, at the John Locke Foundation. Help us, get the word out on all the different projects and research that the John Locke Foundation is doing. These two campaigns' messages could not have been more different going into this election. The Harris campaign really focusing on abortion access, on threats to democracy, those kind of things. So it's and of course the Trump campaign focusing on immigration and prices and the economy. Where do you think that the voters are when they're watching these? Because we watched in our polls things like abortion kind of march up the priority level, even though the numbers didn't really change.
Yeah, I think that abortion really only marched up that priority level for those who were already, that was a top issue for them. But I would say for the undecided, unaffiliated, or independent voter, what really matters is the economy, and that's who either Harris or Trump have to be able to persuade at the end of the day. Those are the folks that needed that strong economy message, and I just don't see how Harris was able to effectively land that one. So she had to pivot to abortion. And so so that's going to resonate with a small slice of the electorate, but it was a lot of women that I think already were inclined to vote for her, as well as some men. But I think for those undecided, the persuadable folks, it will be interesting to see results as the evening plays out, but I think the economy is going to be the one that resonated most, and it seems like Trump spoke a little bit more clearly on that.
And another big issue, of course, was you can't have Trump back again, and that was one of the key messages. one of the things that I'd like to get your thoughts about this too is one of the key messages for Joe Biden 4 years ago was there's just been too much chaos. Trump is the chaos candidate. Let's go back to the way things were when they were normal, when Obama was president and I was vice president. Right. But now, it doesn't seem like Trump is necessarily the chaos candidate. He's maybe the let's go back to the way things were a few years ago rather than what we're seeing now.
Yeah, it's interesting how the word chaos can become very slippery and elusive depending on who's using the term. And so when Americans think about the past 4 years, they're going to associate it with the Biden presidency for obvious reasons because he was president, and they're going to tie that to Harris. And so using the term chaos and I'm not talking down to the, about the electorate, but we have short memories oftentimes. We're thinking about what's happening here and now. And so trying to recall what it was like in 2019 and 2020 it's not as consequential as what people are thinking of today, right now. And so I think that Harris had started to pivot a little bit to a sort of future casting in her messaging as of late, but given the high propensity of voters this election to vote early, I don't know if that was too little too late. But again, I could be eating crow by the end of this night. Maybe that message landed really well with the swing states. We'll see. But to your point, I think that chaos is an interesting term to use, and I think it's maybe it doesn't land quite as heavily anymore.
But in messaging, I do think it's interesting how well the Democrats did in pivoting from Biden to Harris. You know, that is something that a lot of Republicans were just, that could never possibly happen. Well, it did. They ended up with a presidential candidate who never got one primary vote. And that is something that I think a lot of Republicans had heartburn with. Democrats didn't seem to.
No, it was interesting to see just how big of a swing in enthusiasm Democrats had once Biden dropped out of the race and Harris was put in. And I think it had to do a lot with just confidence and voter excitement and anticipation. So does that carry through tonight? That will be interesting to find out. But it certainly was a strategic and wise move. It's clear that Democrats ended up, moving over to Harris. Even though she hadn't won any primaries, it seems like the electorate was more confident in her ability to run compared to Biden.
They really had depressed turnout in the primary. And, when you don't get somebody to show up for the primary, it's going to be harder to get them to show up for the general, right?
That has been a case. Now, one of the interesting things is the Trump campaign had to make a major shift, too, because they were thinking, oh, we're going to be running against Joe Biden. We run clearly on his record, but also on Joe Biden being maybe a little too old, maybe a little too out of it. They couldn't run on that with Kamala Harris, so you have to give at least some credit to the Trump team that they came up with a message for Harris that, at least in some places, seems to have worked.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. It is interesting, as soon as Harris became the nominee for the Democrats, she immediately pivoted to Trump's age. Like, she started attacking that at first, but it did not land the way in which I think the Democrats were message testing a lot those first couple of weeks, and that was one they tried to go after, but then you saw that fizzle out a little bit. And they've just been, cycling through a few different messages, but I think at the very end, they really zeroed in on abortion, and it's okay to be a closet Harris voter and secretly voting. That was some of their
Julia Roberts
which is fascinating because, I mean, do you know any Harris voters that are silent about their support?
No.
I don't really know any. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that was the implication. So maybe they're dreamcasting on that, or maybe there really is a silent Harris voter. We're not sure in the polling. It will be interesting to do a postmortem after the election to see if the polls were picking up or missing that silent Harris voter.
Well, this is something I'd like to ask both of you because some of the implication from those ads was that the men in the family are forcing the women to vote for Trump, and so
when
they
found that really offensive. Actually, that was a bad strategic move.
It was pandering, and it was talking down to the women as if there was no volition of our own. And so, seeing some of the women show up at polling places, I saw some screenshots of ladies or photos of ladies in Handmaid's Tale gowns, and I'm just thinking, what universe do you live in where you really feel as if this is appropriate? To me, that reeks of some privilege that you have that the rest of us.
Well, and it also tells you what must be going on behind the scenes. And because in the same week they had that message, don't listen to your husband, go vote for Harris. And you had Mark Cuban saying, well, Trump doesn't surround himself with smart women. So that just one right after the other. If I was, it was embarrassing, I think.
My social media feeds were full of women who, had the Cuban comment and it said,
right.
Hey.
Right. Yeah, it is very interesting. Actually, let's go to the dashboard. If we can pull that up real quick, let's just see where we are, because these numbers are coming in. They're changing pretty fast right now. We've got about 45.5% of our precincts reporting right now. Donald Trump still leading Kamala Harris right now in North Carolina. Trump with 51% of the vote to Kamala Harris's 47.6% of the vote, with 45.5% of our precincts reporting. So, if that holds true, it should be a good night. And that is enough. Is that enough, do you think, to pull up, more Republican candidates down ballot?
It's possible. The last time that we looked at the Council of State, and the numbers weren't completely up to date there, Josh Stein, who the Associated Press has already told us is winning the governor's race, was well ahead. And then you saw there were a couple of other races where the Democratic Council of State candidate was ahead. Elaine Marshall, who has been the Secretary of State since 1996 when she beat Richard Petty, but she wasn't up by a huge margin. And then the superintendent's race, Mo Green was ahead. And also there was one other where the Democratic candidate was ahead. But Republicans were doing quite well in the rest of those Council of State races.
Rachel Hunt has pulled ahead a little bit of
so
how
she has.
Weatherman.
Okay, so that one was very close. Last time we had looked at it, was about a 1/10 of a percentage point in Weatherman's favor. So those numbers could shift back and forth during the course of the evening.
Sure, and Jeff Jackson right now leading Dan Bishop, 51%. To 48. So some of these numbers will shift around, but I do think it's interesting because that means in some of these ones that we've had come in, people are splitting their ticket.
Yep. That's quintessential North Carolina voter, it seems, which I think is fascinating, but it's also, I would say, a point of pride for North Carolinians because they refuse to be boxed in.
Sure.
Unaffiliated voters are the fastest growing voting bloc, and it's fascinating to see how inclined North Carolinians are to split their tickets.
Yeah, very interesting.
The one congressional race that's competitive, Don Davis still in the lead at this point with 52%. To Lori Buckout's 45%. That's in Congressional District 1, the only really competitive congressional race this time around. All of the other races right now are going the way that you'd expect. 10 Republicans, 3 Democrats. This is the one true toss-up, which could have national significance in helping determine which party controls the House of Representatives going forward.
Great. Well, Brooke Medina from the John Locke Foundation, thanks so much for coming in here and for all the work you're doing. None of this can happen without you. You're just the energy behind the scenes. I really appreciate it.
Got a great team here.
And if you like what you're seeing, you can thank Brooke because she's the one who's telling all these people where to go and what to do.
What to do, right. That's
and a whole team of other people, too. You guys give me too much credit. Thank you.
All right, we're going to head over to the newsroom now. We are going to hear more about those congressional races. We were just giving you a little bit, filling you in on what we see happening right now. We've got Jeff Moore and David Larson in there in the newsroom with the latest on some of these really close congressional races and of course, that big one in Congressional District 1. Hi, guys. How's it going out there?
Going good.
Good. Thanks, Donna. Thanks for joining us in the Carolina Journal newsroom. Clicking refresh as much as we can on these numbers as they come in. And looking at some of these federal races, it appears that Trump has carrying a lead right now in the race with about 1.65 million votes in his favor so far. And looking at some of these other federal races and the congressional races, North Carolina has a unique situation where we're going to have a lot of fresh faces in Congress, it seems, going into 2025 as a result, David Larson, our opinion editor at Carolina Journal, of some kind of structural changes that happen with redistricting. So with some of these races, we've got some familiar faces that are coming back, one in the form of Mark Harris, a Republican who was in the news a lot several years ago as his congressional race was in some hot water there. in the 8th district, I believe. But so he eventually lost out to Dan Bishop there, who's running for Attorney General now. Mark Harris is running again in the 8th district. But we all have other fresh faces as well that will be coming in. So tell us a little bit about that and what we're garnered to see.
Sure. Yeah. So the districts that we have right now in North Carolina, they were drawn up by a court to be fair because the Democrat-run Supreme Court at the time. Now it's now there's a Republican court, but at that time they had thought that the Republicans had gerrymandered, and so they took it from a 7-7 to now we have what's a 10-3-1 basically, where there's going to be 10 districts that are very beneficial to the Republicans or favor the Republicans, 3 that are overwhelmingly Democrat, that are one's in Charlotte and 2 are in the Triangle, and there's the Democrat 3, and then 1 swing district. So as you're saying, with that, there's going to be some new faces, partly because the Democrats that were in these districts that got redrawn a little bit, they used to have 7 Congress people, or they still do. But under these new districts, 3, maybe 4. So some of the ones who had a district that looked less favorable, like Wiley Nickel, Kathy Manning, and Jeff Jackson, all 3 of them just declined to run because they said there's really no point. So I think, Addison McDowell, he's already declared victory in Kathy Manning's old seat.
Yeah, the 6th district.
If we want to go over some of those new faces, Addison McDowell, he's a younger guy. He was U.S. Senator Ted Budd staff member, and he will be representing up in the Triad area. The Triad is Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point, that kind of area.
Yeah.
And then down in Charlotte, there'll be a couple new actually down there. One, Jeff Jackson, he's running for Attorney General, and so when he declined to run, Speaker Tim Moore, he is the Republican that stepped into that district to run. And basically, whoever won the primary in that one, and he being the speaker
forward.
had some weight, good.
Yeah, so a new face for Congress, but very familiar for North Carolina, obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. So that'll be another new face, at least for Congress, and quite a few others. I don't know, Brad Knott in the Triangle area, he's going to take over for Wiley Nickel. But overall, yeah, there'll be about
Harrigan
5 or 6 new Republicans.
Yeah, so either or. And they were just discussing that 1st district contest, which is in District 1 in North Carolina. It's one of the most competitive districts in North Carolina for sure. It's the only true toss-up, but actually under the microscope nationwide, because that can be critical in adding one more of those seats for the Republicans and looking to take over a majority in the U.S. House.
Because it's very close. I think a lot of people are assuming that the U.S. Senate, really all they have to do after West Virginia is that'll make Republicans have 50 out of 100 seats, and then they have to pick up, some pretty favorable Trump states, like maybe pick up one in Montana. That's a pretty easy pickup for John Tester, or Moreno, I believe his name is, in Ohio.
Yeah,
Bernie Moreno. So there's probably the Senate's gonna be Republican, but the U.S. House, it looks like not many of the prognosticators are willing to make a strong call there.
Yeah.
But if only 4 seats flip from Republican to Democrats, Democrats can take it. So the fact that North Carolina redistricting is going to give 3 more Republicans for sure, maybe a 4th, that could cover that whole.
Yeah.
For the Republicans nationally, they're probably very grateful that North Carolina redistricted in that way, because it really at least gives them some padding, if not prevents a Democrat takeover of the U.S. House.
Yeah. North Carolina is proving to be important in all sorts of ways nationally for this race. For Congress and the presidential race as a swing state, operationally, on the Republican side of things, you got Republican leaders from North Carolina that are leading the RNC now and working with the Trump campaign in that way. So North Carolina featuring very prominently in the 2024 elections. But beyond the congressional races, the presidential race, obviously, we've got some different items on the ballot. We've got a referendum up there for citizen-only voting to add that as an amendment to the North Carolina Constitution. And it looks like we've got about a 3-to-1 margin in favor of for that amendment. So what do you make of that?
That's something that we here at John Locke Foundation, a lot of our colleagues put effort into that, getting that on there, because there was just some vague language there. I mean, a lot of people interpreted the language in the Constitution to say that only citizens could vote, but it wasn't as as sure legal language as it could have been. So this will really rewrite it to be absolutely certain that only U.S. citizens can vote, whether they're naturalized or born. And so that looks that people on both sides of the aisle appear to be voting for that in numbers to suggest that that will pass.
Yeah.
So that's pretty.
It's
pretty
interesting.
important.
I mean, that's one of the policy issues, and illegal immigration and the border, a huge issue nationally and among these swing states. And so when you put an issue like that on the ballot, and it's the issue itself, you have a massive margin, 75 to 25 so far. But when you put those issues in the form of different candidates, those margins get a lot closer, and the things get a lot more muddled. I guess maybe it's not as straightforward, but
yeah. I was curious what you thought about some of these judicial races, because there's a Supreme Court one, and there's some other appeals court. Because as we're saying with redistricting and with a lot of other elements, things that the General Assembly passes, if you don't have a conservative court, if they do rely on having that to keep some of their laws in place as having favorable appeals courts.
Appellate courts, for sure. So we've got one Supreme Court race up, and we've got 3 Court of Appeals races. The Republicans look to be leading in all of those races so far. They're still relatively tight, but Republicans have had an advantage in the judicial races back through a few cycles here in North Carolina. There's some inherent kind of partisan advantage kind of built in as far as the courts go. So you have those races moving in that direction. It should be more heartening for Republicans moving forward. And like you said, it's going to be very relevant. With Stein picking up a projected win in North Carolina, there's going to be a battle between the legislature and the governor's office. And so the courts could feature very prominently in those battles going forward.
And that's interesting too. Just there was a time when there was no R or D next to a judge's name. So you'd have, for all intents and purposes, partisan races where somebody would be outside the polling station with here are the Republican judges, even if it doesn't say Republican, or conservative judges and more liberal judges. But now it will have an R or a D, and that's extra information the voter has. And since that's happened, Republicans have largely, it seems that North Carolina voters prefer Republican judges and have been using that party designation next to the candidates to pick. It went from majority Democrat to very quickly, if Allison Riggs loses this, that'll be a 6-1 court, which it will take a decade or more for them to come back from that if they can.
Yeah, so they've been putting a lot of emphasis on this race. We've got a couple of more items going on here with the presidential. Actually, when we do this, we end up refreshing these results just constantly. And so you can glean different things based on the whatever 30-second period you actually refresh these results to see where we are. Some of these council of state races, we've got Trump at the top of the ticket, obviously. You've got Robinson in the governor's race. They've already projected a win for Josh Stein, the Democrat, in that race. What do you make of that dynamic between the presidential and the gubernatorial race, and then what effect it may have on those down ballot races in the council of state?
I've always been perplexed by the choices of North Carolina voters. They're very independent voters, I think. So if they have a voter, a candidate they like, a lot of times they've selected Donald Trump and Roy Cooper the last 2 cycles, right?
Yeah.
So that's North Carolina. North Carolinians are not shy about splitting tickets, and so I think that's what's going on right now too. Is they seem to be coming out. Trump is maintaining a lead while Josh Stein is ahead by enough to have already called
double digits, yeah.
So and some of these other ones are pretty close. I think Dan Bishop for Attorney General might have a slight edge over Jeff Jackson, or can we scroll down on that one? Maybe, if you go down to Council of State
here.
But I mean, it's at least neck and neck there.
So yeah, it looks.
Jackson's now pulled ahead, but they're going back and forth depending on which counties are reporting. Well, I mean, what is pretty interesting is what counties are reporting, because you can read a lot into that and say, okay, there's not a lot of votes coming out of Mecklenburg right now, which is where Charlotte, the biggest city in North Carolina, is. Some Republicans are getting nervous about that, because if all those votes in the biggest, most populous area haven't come out, that could mean more votes for Democrats.
Yeah.
So I guess we gotta roll.
So nail-biting to ensue for sure for Republicans with the Mecklenburg County vote. And we appreciate you joining us here in the Carolina Journal newsroom. We'll throw it back to Donna and Mitch in the studio. Donna?
Hi, thanks, guys. I appreciate the update. Great insights, actually,
Yes.
from our team. I'm just so impressed with everybody. You know, we've been working on this for a year. And coming down to election night, I know everybody's tired of the commercials, tired of worrying about it, and it looks like this might be an earlier evening than I was expecting. So the question now is, what happens next?
Yes.
You know, these races are not over.
No.
But, you know, what does this mean for public policy? What does this mean for culture? You know, what are you seeing first in these numbers now?
Well, now I think we're seeing numbers coming in that are from both Republican-leaning counties and Democratic-leaning counties. We saw for a while there a surge that really went from blue to red, where all of the Council of State races, and except for that governor's race, ended up going toward the Republicans' advantage. Then you saw things shift back. Last time I looked, in the lieutenant governor's race, attorney general's race, superintendent of public instruction, secretary of state, all of those were going toward the Democrats, with the Republicans leading the other races, which probably was more in line with what some of the polling had said. So now it's just going to be, as the rest of the results come in, do we see things staying where they are now, or do they shift again? And I think that'll be very interesting to watch. I know once we get to our good friend Dallas Woodhouse from American Majority Action, he's watching these numbers very closely, and I'm sure he's digging in to see which counties are still out, so he knows where the numbers are likely to go.
Absolutely. Dallas, welcome back. Carolina Journal, our live coverage of 2024 elections. Tell me what your thoughts are so far in the evening.
Yeah, so we're here in the headquarters for Team Trump and the Wake County Party, and I just want to point out to you that election death has made the first call of North Carolina for Donald Trump. So we have one call for North Carolina for Donald Trump. There's simply not enough votes left. I'm going to walk outside where it's quiet.
All right, that's fine. So if you can't hear quite what Dallas is saying there, there is an organization, News Nation and The Hill, and they have called North Carolina for Donald Trump. We are kind of holding out to see what the Associated Press, that ends up being the one that tends to call them. But certainly the numbers are looking good for the Trump campaign. They have to be pleased with the effort that they made, and certainly Republicans for getting out that Republican vote early in the cycle and banking that vote. Dallas,
can you hear me now?
I'm leaving, so.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine, Dallas. And before we get back to your sense of where things stand, just to talk about those numbers, Donald Trump with all of the numbers in so far, and we're looking at in the neighborhood of 3.6 million votes cast and counted. Trump at just under 52% and Harris at just under 47%. So a pretty good lead for him.
Teresa, what are we doing? Council state?
It just doesn't look like
Council state.
I just tweeted myself, my personal account, that Trump's going to win in North Carolina. There's just not enough votes left for Harris. And I think, other than, obviously the race was called for Josh Stein, I think we're in a amazingly good shape in virtually all of the Council of State races. There has been one piece of negative news for Republicans tonight. Ruth Smith, running in the state house in a newly created Republican-leaning district in Buncombe County, has lost to incumbent Democrat. I think it's Prather. Is that how you say her name, Mitch?
I think so.
Lindsay Prather or Prather? I could be either one.
Yeah, I mean, that was really one that Republicans were counting to pick up. But I think the turnout, I didn't follow everything, but I think the Democrat probably did a pretty good job staying visible and busy in the flood recovery and that kind of thing. And so I saw a couple of other Republicans in the state house that were down earlier, but I haven't checked back. I think, like I said, Trump has won the state. Whenever somebody wants to call it, they call it. But, there's just not enough votes left. And Republicans are in really good shape. I think it's still shaping up to be a really good night for Republicans in North Carolina. There's a little bit of us who've done this for a while, Mitch and Donna, and that the way returns are coming in is a little bit different tonight. And there are some big counties out there.
Sure.
But I think the networks will start calling North Carolina for Trump pretty soon.
Do you think it's enough to pull some of those council of states with them, or do you think that they're really running on their own?
I think he is pulling them. North Carolina Republicans are going to win the treasurer's race, the auditor's race, the insurance commissioner, the ag commissioner, and the labor commissioner race. Democrats are going to win the governor. I think the other ones are up for grabs right now.
Sure.
I mean, part of it is, I think Republicans will win the lieutenant governor's race and the attorney general's race if there is still a significant amount of the election day vote out. But that's hard for me to tell where I am right now.
Sure, sure.
I'm also watching Congressional District 1. Last I checked, Don Davis was still up about 8,000 votes. Still roughly another 100,000 votes to count. So we'll see how that goes.
All right. Thank you so much, Dallas. I appreciate American Majority Action, keeping tabs on all of this, a deep knowledge of North Carolina history and politics. I appreciate you joining us. All right, so you want to go over some of these numbers, Mitch? What are you thinking?
Sure. So he mentioned the District 1 race, which is the one competitive congressional district that we're looking at, and he mentioned 8,000. The numbers now say Don Davis with a 20,000 vote lead, 53% for Davis to 45% for Lori Buckout. That, of course, is the one competitive race. 10 Republicans are expected to win congressional seats in North Carolina, 3 Democrats, and then this will be the toss-up. And it has national significance because there are going to be a handful of races across the country among the 435 seats that will help determine who has control of the U.S. House of Representatives in 2025, and that race is one of them. So that's one that we definitely need to watch.
Absolutely, and really that race has been a Democratic stronghold for a very long time. Northern part, it's up in sort of the northern and eastern part of North Carolina. Democrats have had that space for a long time. Don Davis, we saw running kind of as a more moderate Democrat, was one of the ones that signed a letter that was criticizing Vice President Kamala Harris for her handling of immigration at the southern border, but then turn around and endorse her. So, it's just one of those things that area is going to be a little more conservative, but it still has been a big Democrat stronghold.
It has, and that district has changed over the years. Years and years ago, longtime observers of North Carolina politics will remember this was Walter Jones Sr.'s seat up there in eastern North Carolina. And then after Walter Jones Sr. retired and Walter Jones Jr. tried to run for the race, by that time that district had become, by design, a majority-minority district designed to elect a minority Democrat. And now the district has been shifted in such a way that it could elect either a Republican or a Democrat. So that first district, although it's generally in the same part of the state, has shifted enough both demographically and in the district lines that it really could be won by either party, which is why Republicans have said, hey, this is a first-term incumbent. This is a chance for us to make a change.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you. We are going to be talking more about this. Let's go on back. We're going to look about the Council of State races. We've been talking a lot about those. Nick Craig is in the newsroom there with Teresa Opeka with the latest on what we're having. These Council of State races, the importance of these roles really can't be overstated. These run some of your most critical agencies in North Carolina. Nick and Teresa, tell me your thoughts on what we're seeing.
Hey, Donna, Mitch. Yeah, we're continuing to track the Council of State. As of right now, we've got about 48.5% of the vote in. That equates to about 3.7 million votes. Teresa, I guess we'll start at the top of the ticket. There will be a new governor here in North Carolina, and it will be current Democrat Attorney General Josh Stein.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Yep. No surprise. And obviously, he was leading in the polls before the scandal with Mark Robinson came out in September. But yes, he is going to be North Carolina's next governor come January. He's leading. He actually won over 53% of the vote to Robinson's 41%. And he also gave his acceptance speech before. Watched some of that. He thanked everybody. He even thanked people who didn't vote for him. Said he's going to work hard to prove that he's going to do the best job for other people who, did not vote for them. So that's, again, no big surprise in that race, but it was called a little earlier. Some people thought maybe Robinson would have built a little bit more momentum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the current position that Mark Robinson is lieutenant governor. That is now a seat that is going to be open. You've got two candidates running for that, both of them pretty well known. You got current state senator Rachel Hunt. Hal Weatherman is not a rookie to North Carolina politics at all. What's the current status of that race as we approach the 10 o'clock hour this evening?
Actually, it is pretty close. They're almost tied from what it looks like. So, yeah, we've got Hal Weatherman with a little over 40, let's say about 49% of the vote to Hunt's 48%. So it's very close. I think at one time he was a little further ahead. And like you say, it keeps going back and forth. It's still a little bit early.
Yeah, it depends on the county that's reporting in and where things are going on that. So that's a really close race. Attorney General has been a race that has gotten an incredible amount of coverage this election cycle. That one also looks like it's razor thin. What are the latest totals on that race right now?
It is. So right now Jeff Jackson is in the lead with a little over 50% of the vote to Dan Bishop's 49. Well, actually, he's in 49.7, so he must have rounded up to 50. So it's about neck and neck. They're tied.
Looking at those vote totals, you're looking at what, 14,000 votes separating that race right now. I mean,
yeah,
that's a super tight margin.
It is, definitely is.
As we look at the entire Council of State, really, Teresa, the only race that's really a huge runaway, and we talked about it last segment, is the current agricultural commissioner race. Steve Troxler is running away with this race. It's almost a 10-point race right now.
It is, yeah, 53%, 54% to Sarah Tabor's almost 44%. Yeah.
Looking at a couple of the other races, we have an incumbent for the Commissioner of Insurance, Mike Causey, the Republican running for re-election against Natasha Marcus. What's the current status of that race?
Yeah, so right now it looks like the incumbent, Causey, he is leading quite a bit. He's got about 53% to Natasha Marcus's 46.8%, 47%, if you will. So it looks like he's got a good lead right now.
One of the interesting races I want to wrap up here with is the superintendent of public instruction. This race, really a race like this doesn't typically get the media coverage that this one has. You've got Mo Green, the more Democrat establishment member, compared to Michelle Morrow, who has run a grassroots campaign on the Republican side, an upset back in March in the primary.
Yeah.
How's that race shaking out right now?
Even Obama mentioned this race.
Which is insane to have a former president mention a superintendent race.
Exactly. So right now, Mo Green is leading with 50% of the vote, but it's very close because Michelle Morrow has got 49.9. So that's almost neck and neck too.
Yeah, so many of these races are so tight right now. Teresa Opeka joins us in the Carolina Journal newsroom. Again, just recapping, we've got about 48.5% of the vote in. We're going to pause here at the top of the 10 o'clock hour, and we're going to reset and get everything ready for our final hour of our election night broadcast. You're watching Carolina Journal's coverage of the 2024 election on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel.
right, welcome back to this fourth hour of Carolina Journal live coverage of the 2024 election. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. I'm glad you're sticking with us. Lots going on, but a little earlier night than I was expecting. Give us some updates of what we have.
Sure. Mitch Kokai, senior political analyst at the John Locke Foundation. We are also joined by Donald Bryson, CEO and president of the John Locke Foundation as well, and we'll be getting Donald's insights. But a couple of the big things we already know fairly early on, the Associated Press called the North Carolina governor's race for Josh Stein, the Democratic Attorney General running against Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Sure. Still, if you're looking at the numbers, double-digit leads for Josh Stein with the numbers that are in so far. We also know, and we're going to be hearing a little bit more about this a little bit later this hour, the constitutional amendment for citizens-only voting, that was called fairly early as a success, getting widespread support. Katie Zender is going to be talking about that in just a bit. We know that the congressional races that we expected to go a particular way have gone the way that we expected. 10 Republicans in the lead, 3 Democrats in the lead. Don Davis still with a pretty good lead in the one toss-up district in Congressional District 1. We still need to await some final results on there. But also some interesting results that we might not have expected. And while you and I, Donna, have been looking at some of these races, we know that Donald has also been keeping his eye on some races of interest. And Donald, what has really stood out to you?
Well, Republicans are winning a couple of state house seats that maybe they shouldn't, or they were ahead in early voting that they shouldn't be. Mike Sheetzelt, a Republican candidate running here in Wake County for House District 35, actually did fairly well. He's behind right now if you look at the State Board of Elections website, but he did fairly well in early voting. If we stick with the trend of what the rest of the state looks like when we bring in Election Day votes, he very well may pull ahead. And you know, if Republicans are going to maintain supermajorities in the state house, they're going to have to win some of those Wake County and Mecklenburg County seats. Not all of them, but they're going to have to pick up wins in those counties, and that would be a Wake County seat that Republicans would pick up.
Full disclosure, Mike Sheetzelt, former John Locke Foundation
employee. And
deep blue Wake County.
Yeah, and now that district is a fairly balanced district, but it was one that, you know, Democrats have maintained pretty good strangleholds on Wake County and Mecklenburg County, more Wake County than Mecklenburg County in the past few cycles. So that's an interesting thing. One race that I'm following, and I'm trying to figure out if I believe it or not.
Okay.
And I can't remember the district number, but I believe it's Senate District 2 or 3. Right, it's the Norm Sanderson district.
Yeah.
Senator Sanderson has been in that seat since sort of the Tea Party election, the 2010 race.
He's now ahead.
And he's now ahead. So before we came in here, he had been behind, and actually fairly significantly. And so that was a little bit of a head scratcher on what was going on. At that point, the Pamlico and Carteret County votes had not come in yet, and those are deep red counties within that district. And so it was like, he's a fairly popular senator in that district. What's going on? But now he's ahead, and so that's good to know.
We'll give you an update with 59 of 93 precincts reporting. He is now at 51.6%, and his Democratic opponent, T. Davis, is at 46.6%.
We don't know if he's iced or sweet or unsweet, but he's T. Davis.
Well, the first name is actually Terry. It's Tare. I apologize for not knowing, but
I don't know either.
The initial after the name is T.
Sure.
T. Davis.
Well, I think it's important also to note that nationally, Democrats have targeted North Carolina state legislative districts, which is interesting to me because this has been part of an effort by a group called the DLCC, and they have been focused on trying to flip some state legislatures across and namely among them North Carolina. So they want to break that supermajority that North Carolina has had for some time, because really the policy that hits people at home, hits their wallets, kitchen table issues are happening at the state legislative level. So Democrats have been targeting putting money into some of these local races and state legislative races.
Tip O'Neill, all politics is local, and national groups have been targeting state legislative races in North Carolina for a long time. I used to be the state director for Americans for Prosperity, a national group on the right. But it was very clear, even at that point, 6, 8, 10 years ago, And it's still true that the national groups on the left are also very busy.
Sure.
The League of Conservation Voters is very busy. Emily's List is very busy here.
Yep.
The National Resources Defense Fund, a lot of the environmental groups. And so, in a lot of ways, while everybody is focused on the White House, that's not important.
Sure.
Those national groups are really focusing in the same way they would focus on, the presidential race in other states, focusing on state legislature here.
Why is that?
And remember, this has a significant impact on the way policy plays out. Over the last 2 years, we have seen Republicans with supermajorities in the state House and Senate. And for folks who don't follow this stuff as closely as we do, what we're talking about is there are 50 members of the state Senate, 120 members of the state House. If the governor vetoes a bill, the legislature can still move that bill forward if it has a veto-proof supermajority, which in North Carolina, it's kind of a low threshold. It's 60%.
It is.
And Republicans have been right at that number the last 2 years.
I mean,
so
one seat can change it.
that's one seat could change it. In fact, after the election last time, there were one vote short in the House. Tricia Cotham's flip from Democrat to Republican gave them the supermajority. So over the past couple of years, Republican-led General Assembly passes a bill. Governor doesn't like it. He vetoes it. And basically, the General Assembly has said, ha-ha, and they've gone back and overridden the veto. But you only have to look back a couple of years for a time period when there was not a supermajority, and the Republican-led General Assembly could not override a single Governor Cooper veto.
We didn't have budgets for a long time.
Right, and that's what the Democrats are looking for, Donald, isn't it? They basically, if you have to have a Republican legislature, which they don't like, they would like to have that Democratic governor able to say, well, you can't do the really Republican conservative stuff. I'm going to stop you.
That's right. That's exactly right. And since Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008, the idea that North Carolina is a swing state up and down the ballot has really played into the national mindset about how to view North Carolina. And so that's another reason why they feel like they can come in and play at that more local level and turn seats. The left has not had quite the success that they probably wanted to over the past 10 years, but that's not for lack of trying. A lot of money is being spent in this state.
Absolutely. What does this mean from a policy perspective? We don't have all the results in. Certainly, it seems to be trending in Republicans' favor, really even from the first couple of days of early voting. If this does end up being, let's say they retain the supermajority, or even if they don't, what does this mean for public policy and groups like the John Locke Foundation?
Well, I think in public policy, you're going to have a lot more robust discussions about what the future of tax reform is in North Carolina. I know there's still a lot of appetite in both majorities to talk about what that means necessarily about the state income tax, or do we change different taxes around and reform that?
And that's not a party thing. There are certainly Democrats that are in favor of that, and it's not something that we,
No, that's absolutely true.
Majority,
in fact, our next governor, if you look at one of his last ads, it says, Josh Stein cut taxes, which what he's saying when it says that on the screen is Josh Stein wants to cut taxes for workers and lower their costs.
Right.
So if he's really interested in that, there may be some opportunity to work.
There very well may be. I will be curious to see what that is.
Yeah, what are the opportunities and challenges, right?
But I do think, from a very important issue to us here at the John Locke Foundation is if Republicans maintain supermajorities in both chambers of the legislature, this probably seals and protects the State Opportunity Scholarship Program.
Okay.
They are safe. And you'll probably see, a funding mechanism, a more robust funding mechanism.
Sure.
And by that I mean like one that makes sense and is probably formulaic going into the future to make sure that program is consistently funded into perpetuity. That's one that has Democrats not deeply divided, but somewhat divided. But if there are Republican supermajorities, then that cake is probably baked.
Right, and they've already spelled out a certain amount of increase of funding for opportunity scholarships going forward a number of years. So they might not have to take action in the next session, but certainly if they had supermajorities, they would have that option.
Yeah, they would. And if you look at a study done by Dr. Bob Lupke here at the John Locke Foundation with the Center for Effective Education, he has put out a study over, in the last 2 months called Funding Our Future, and it talks about maybe making school choice funding formulaic and tied to the amount that we pay per pupil for public education. A lower amount for vouchers, but then that would actually, I don't know, it wouldn't be just this one big line item in the budget that we haggle over and toss around like a football going forward.
Sure, and taxes are slated to go down. Do you think that that would continue? What are you looking for?
Well, that's a great question. You know, Republicans in the state Senate, even 10, 12 years ago at this point, wanted to talk about removing the state income tax and shifting to more of a broader sales tax base.
Sure.
And there are merits to that argument. There are also some concerns about that argument. My argument about taxes is lower,
sure,
right?
Sure.
I like lower overall.
It would be nice to have a break on something financial.
No, oh, absolutely it would. North Carolina is interesting because, you know, counties have fewer obligations when it comes to transportation and roads. They also have fewer obligations when it comes to Medicaid. The state took that away from as a financial obligation to counties back in the 80s or 90s. And so if you get rid of the income tax, what do you do with, how do you replace it in terms of revenue? And if you give that back to the counties, well then are counties going to increase property taxes? Are they going to increase sales taxes? And is that better or worse than an income tax? That is a very healthy policy debate and a good place for us to be if we get to have that discussion, though.
That would be exciting. All right, Donald Bryson, CEO, President of the John Locke Foundation. We've got a lot coming in 2025.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to see where that focus is in policy. Thanks so much.
Great.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. All right, let's head back to the newsroom. Nick Craig there. One of the things that the General Assembly talked about in policy is citizens-only voting amendment. You probably saw it on your ballot. Katie and Nick, what is the latest on that?
Hey Donna, yeah, and you know, for all night, Katie, we've been saying, oh, well, we don't have the full results yet. We're waiting for additional details, and while many of these races are still so close in the state, this race, however, if you call it a race, for or against this constitutional amendment, that's over at this point, is it not?
Absolutely, yeah. So AP actually called this race well over an hour ago with about 77% in favor of the constitutional amendment, which is actually a little bit lower than we thought we might see it come out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So earlier in the year, the Remington Research Group took a poll of likely voters, and of those likely voters, 89% supported seeing a constitutional amendment on the ballot, and 87% said they would vote for a constitutional amendment if it appeared on the ballot. So yeah, it is just a tiny bit lower than, you know, those poll numbers that we took earlier in the year, but yeah, still significantly, you know, passing.
Well, I want to actually read through the amendment. If you voted today on Election Day, it's probably fresh in your mind. If you voted all the way back on the 17th of last month on the first day of early voting, maybe not. This is how it read. The title is Constitutional Amendment. Constitutional Amendment to provide that only a citizen of the United States who is 18 years of age and otherwise possessing the qualifications for voting shall be entitled to vote at any election in the state. That was the question. We've seen in the past some of these constitutional amendments can be worded in a funny way where you're not exactly sure whether you need to vote in favor or against something. Katie, this is pretty plain English in terms of reading, and obviously voters seem to obviously understand that. The presidential race doesn't show numbers anywhere near like this. This was a bipartisan decision that voters made today.
Right, Nick, and this actually started back in 2023 when the Senate filed a bill, SB 630, and then also this year, instead of taking up that Senate bill again, Speaker Moore actually filed HB 1074, which has language very, very similar to what appeared on the ballot. Not quite the same, but almost identical. And so this is something that's been coming for a long time, Nick.
Yeah, and you know, looking at these election results for this constitutional amendment, you brought up the percentages. We're coming very close to 3 million people voting in favor of this constitutional amendment.
Right.
This is going to be a massive, I say victory if you want to call it that, but this is going to be very much a referendum on the state of North Carolina, that this is where voters want to be, seemingly regardless of their party affiliation.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Andy Jackson at the Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation said, North Carolina is only the latest of over half a dozen states to approve citizen-only voting amendments to the state constitution. This amendment answers a fundamental question. Should voting in America be limited to citizens only? North Carolina voters overwhelmingly said that it should be so.
And I did see some questions about this. Why did something like this even need to be on the ballot? Were non-citizens permitted to vote in the state already, or is this just maybe adding an extra layer or level of protection that it isn't there right now?
Right, so federal law actually prohibits non-citizens from voting, but this is really adding another level of protection because, we've seen in the last, couple of years and in the last couple of months, not only in North Carolina but across the U.S., non-citizens being removed from those voter rolls by the State Board of Elections.
Well, and I can also imagine we look at some other states, and you've seen now, especially out in California, where they allow non-citizens to vote in local races.
Right, and I believe it's in California where people are going to vote and they're showing their ID, and the poll workers saying, no, we're not allowed to see your ID, don't show us your ID.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we look at this constitutional amendment here, citizen-only voting, that is going to be in favor for well over, just refresh my totals, it's now over 3 million votes in favor of that. We've got at this point in time about 54% of the vote in now. Katie, transitioning to some of the other information and details across the state, currently looking at a race for president that's at this point in time up to a 6-point margin for Donald Trump, 52-46. Now, we're still waiting on some major areas, seeing nothing from Bellwether County, New Hanover, still waiting for some vote totals out of Wake and Meck, but as we get closer to 10:30 here, things are starting to wrap up. We've got almost 70% of the precincts in.
Right, and I'm not surprised, Nick, at the results that we're seeing here. In the last couple of days with what we've seen with early voter turnout, Democrats down, Republicans up, I'm really not surprised at these results at all. North Carolina, and not just North Carolina, states across the nation have really flipped early voting on its head with, Republicans coming out in droves and Democrats actually dropping in early voting, which is unprecedented. And, North Carolina made history with over 4 million voters casting their ballots in early voting. That's unprecedented.
Let's talk a little bit about betting, shall we? That's been a top issue in North Carolina over the last couple of years. In March, that's when that went live. And as we look at it right now, Polymarkets, which has been one of these really popular websites, we talked with Brene about this earlier, Trump's up to almost 84% on Polymarkets. We're seeing Republican turnout in many states, including Florida and even Virginia, Pennsylvania, and here in North Carolina. Really strong so far, and obviously we're waiting for some of these other states, Arizona, New Mexico, to close, Nevada, for them to close their polling locations, being a couple hours behind. But things, if you're a Republican tonight, seemingly are trending in the right direction.
Right, and we're seeing a lot of these swing states, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, that are traditionally swing states, turning a lot more red than they have been in previous years, Nick.
Yeah, just getting some additional updates here right now. Still waiting for some information out of Mecklenburg County. They have not reported any early or in-person votes yet. That's about 500,000 votes that will come in from that. So still waiting on that. New Hanover County, there's about 97,000 votes out there that are still withstanding. So a lot going on here, continuing in the state. Katie, thanks for the update on that. We will now throw it back to Donna and Mitch in the Carolina Journal studio as we continue our election night coverage here on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel.
All right, thanks so much, Nick and Katie. You're right, there are some outstanding votes talking about Mecklenburg County, New Hanover County. Not hearing a lot from them. Jim Sterling joining us here from the John Locke Foundation. Tell me what you're watching.
So I'm watching a lot of the Council of State seats right now. There's some interesting races to watch there. There's starting to see some leads and disparities, not just in the governor's race, but in other Council of State races as well. Right now, as you kind of expect, Troxler's ahead by a large margin than most of the other Council of State members. Like many people have always said, he's kind of like the Marlboro Man of North Carolina. He's going to be the lead person on this, and if he goes down on the Republican ballot, he ends up losing, it's probably not going to be a good night for Republicans to check the results.
He even looks like the Marlboro Man to some
Yeah, he does.
Well,
I've got my dashboard up here if we want to take a look at it on the Council of State race. Of course, Josh Stein's still leading by like 12 points on that one. No big surprise there.
Yeah, it might narrow down a little bit, but we're still waiting on some major counties that are more Democrat leaning. We're waiting on Mecklenburg for its election day, or excuse me, early voting. And we're waiting on Wake County for its election day voting. One of the things that's a little bit different this year is how we do the reporting style. Some counties are getting their early voting data in on time before they start reporting the precincts. Others are coming in after they start reporting the precincts. It's why we can't call some of these state House races and state Senate races because we just don't have.
But that's a lot of votes, and that's a lot of blue votes. Could we see a big shift in the presidential when those come in?
Well, we could see a big shift on it, but I don't think there's enough there because Mecklenburg, for example, doesn't have enough to really overtake the lead Trump's kind of establishing at this point.
Okay.
If Wake County has a huge turnout, which it doesn't seem like it did today, even then it would be cutting it very close. He's got such a padding at this point, it's hard for me to see, unless there's some kind of massive amount of votes that we're not accounting for on Election Day in Durham County, Orange County's in, but in Wake, it's hard to see that being the case.
You mentioned you've been following Council of State. I just did a refresh while you were chatting with Donna, and other than the governor's race, now the Republican candidates are leading in every other Council of State race, but of course some of them are very close. You've got Lieutenant Governor's pretty close. You've got Superintendent is close. You've got the Attorney General's race very close. All of those close.
That's the one I'm watching the most, is the Attorney General.
Yeah. Dan Bishop, Republican, against Jeff Jackson, Democrat.
Based on what's still outstanding, what are you going to be watching for to see which way it's actually going to end up shifting?
There are a lot of those that are moving. I think it's easier to say which ones we're not really going to be watching as much anymore. It's looking like for labor, weirdly enough, and insurance, those are kind of going the way that Troxler has, where it has a substantial lead going for the Republican. It's not enough to call it yet, but they do have such a substantial lead. It's hard to see, unless there's a titanic shift in Wake County's early voting, that this really moves into the direction of the Democrats.
Treasurer kind of looked that way too. Like
Treasurer was exceeding there, but it's not. When I checked it, it wasn't as high as the other ones. That might have been updated though.
Yeah, that one is about a 7.5 point lead.
That is a pretty substantial one. I think that one is also in that call at this point. We're going to wait. I would wait for a few more precincts to come in, wait for the early voting to come in on Mecklenburg, but I think that these are pretty much a wrap at this point.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think one of those surprising results, if these numbers hold, is Elaine Marshall. It's very close. So
that is the weirdest race I've ever seen.
So
why is that weird? Tell me what's going on. Yeah.
So Elaine Marshall is kind of like the Democrats' Troxler.
Sure.
Elaine Marshall losing is a really bad sign. Your statewide elections are going to go against you for Democrats. She has been there for, I believe,
1996.
Yeah.
She beat Richard Petty.
She's been in there almost as long as I've been alive. So that will give you an idea on that. So that. It was shocking for me to see ads for her in general.
The fact that this race is ads for her and for Troxler, I thought, well, both of these are ones you would expect they're going to win.
Oh, exactly. But the Troxler one didn't really strike me as odd because Elaine Marshall, frankly, within the urban communities like I live in Wake, people know her. They recognize the name. It's not really going to have as much impact. Troxler putting out ads, you can see a little bit more of that within rural communities. He's well known, but we have a lot of people coming into the state. So that could also have an impact on it. But both these guys campaigning at all really just kind of put a lot of people off pace. We were really worried about what this election night's going to look like.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know you're following this very closely, is we really care what's going to happen with the General Assembly and whether Republicans will have the 72 votes in the House, 30 votes in the Senate to keep veto-proof supermajorities. You were mentioning before we started chatting with you that there's a lot that you can look at, but you can't really say definitively because of some of the shifts.
So there are a couple counties in the state that have not gotten in their early voting data. We can't really say what that's going to be yet till we get that information in. Early voting still seems to favor Democrats in some regard. It's going to be a bit of a worse time than early voting, or excuse me, Election Day voting is going to be for Republicans. So races like Senate District 4 with Buck Newton, we can't call that race yet because while he's in the lead, we still don't have all of the early voting data in. So that race could switch because of that.
You work at the Civitas Center for Public Integrity with Dr. Andy Jackson, who we've had on earlier in the program, and one of the things that you do that's so valuable for our work here is put together that Civitas Partisan Index. If you looked at these races this time around, there were a handful of Republican incumbents in districts that the CPI puts as slight Democrat-leaning districts. Are we seeing any of those incumbents facing problems?
Well, we've seen one lose that was in a D+4. I believe it was Sassaman who lost. Sassaman,
okay.
excuse me.
And I saw some ads for his opponent running, who's a city councilman in one of the towns there, I think maybe in Oxford.
Yes, he seems to have lost by about a hair. Less than 1,000 votes. It was a very narrow election in a D+4 district. So that being a 54% likely to go Democrat kind of district as compared to the state. So that was one that seems to be lost for Republicans, but they seem to be able to defend a D+2 in Nash County, which that is frankly going to be the area to watch right now.
Is that the Ken Fontenot district? Okay.
Well, no, Cheshire district.
The Alan Chester district.
I haven't
Ken
seen.
Fontenot is also in that general area.
He
right?
is, but he's the other part of it.
Okay.
So we need to watch that.
Look it up while you're chatting.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that is one of the things that just came out, switching races just a little bit with Donald Trump and Harris. AP, the Associated Press, is estimating that Harris must beat Trump by 18 points in whatever ballots remain to be counted to take the lead. So it's an uphill battle for her at this point in the evening.
Yes, I don't think you're going, even with the counties that are left and the early voting data, I don't think there's enough at this point for her to be able to win this. It's probably going to go for Trump. I'm going to need to look at a little bit more of the data to be able to say it, but unless there's a titanic shift, I think Trump's going to pull the state.
Going back to the districts that we mentioned, the Nash County area, we're talking about districts 24 and 25. District 24, 23 of 25 precincts reporting Ken Fontenot, the Republican incumbent, at 51%, 51.4 to Dante Pittman's 48.5. So I don't know. That's right now it's about 270 votes.
Sure.
And then in the other race with Chesser and Lorenzo Wilkins, Chesser's with the lead with just under 49% to just under 48%, so very close.
These are very narrow. I mean, that area was the area to watch outside of the Wake County area and the Mecklenburg area. Not because those areas are particularly going to flip, but because what is the percentage of the turnout's going to look like? Nash County is a very narrow area in this regard, and that was kind of the one that we're watching for, not only those two seats, but also I believe the Senate 11 seat as well.
Yeah, is that the one with Barnes?
I think it is.
Lisa Barnes?
Yes, that's Lisa Barnes' district.
Okay.
Sure, sure.
So,
what about these council of state? If we can go back to those just a little bit. Hal Weatherman is something that we've been watching pretty closely. He's now leading by 2 points. What are your thoughts on that?
Hal Weatherman, that is a interesting seat. Now, I think there is a possibility that he wins this and Dan Bishop doesn't, even though Dan Bishop seems to be having more votes. It just seems how that's being split up there, that there's not less votes going towards a Democrat in that seat.
Right, right. Now, one of the interesting things about, of course, Lieutenant Governor in North Carolina, they don't have they sit on the State Board of Election, they preside over the Senate, but each Lieutenant Governor can kind of make it their own. You know, it is got some, duties that are inherent, but you see each Lieutenant Governor really personalizing it to the issues that are important to them.
Well, there's a lot more importance on the Council of State as a whole now, because of several law changes and what the Council of State oversees in terms of kind of balancing out the governor in that executive privilege. There's also a lot of appointments that are done through the Lieutenant Governor's position, but it still presides over the Senate. It can still break a narrow majority if there is that divide in the Senate where they don't quite have that supermajority.
Sure.
And almost everyone who is a lieutenant governor basically is practicing to run for governor.
Right.
I mean, it hasn't been very successful.
Right, it
in
hasn't.
North Carolina. I mean, obviously tonight we see a sitting lieutenant governor losing big to the attorney general, but it also, in recent years, has not been that successful. All of the lieutenant governors have tried to run for governor, and only Bev Perdue has won since the era of Jim Hunt succeeding from lieutenant governor to governor.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, my best suggestion is if you're wanting to run for governor, do not be AG.
Right.
Or excuse me, lieutenant governor.
Let's talk about
AG is a
money.
good position for that.
Let's talk about money. I mean, there has been so much money flowing through North Carolina nationally, coming in here really trying to flip some seats. You have a pulse. You have a check on that pulse. Tell me what you think.
So there's been a lot of money, but a lot of that kind of dried up in terms of the gubernatorial.
Okay.
once the CNN piece came out about Robinson, we saw a lot of people pull out money from the Governor's Association, and a lot of money started coming in through other avenues. Looks like there was more emphasis on other races for the leadership committees for the various parties. Most of that money for Republicans ended up going into the AG office, actually, which may seem odd, but we also saw the leadership committee, which typically funds the highest level candidate, being the gubernatorial on the Democrat side. They gave a lot of money to Josh Stein, but Josh Stein kind of gave that money back to the state Democratic Party. And we saw a little bit of transfer over from the party to lower ballot candidates. It's why we saw a lot of money going to people like Allison Riggs from party expenditures. Jeff Jackson got a good amount of that, as well as I believe Mo Green on the superintendent's race as well.
And remember, from Stein's perspective, if he's going to win and doesn't need that money, having Democrats in some of those other positions, including picking off some legislative Republicans, is helpful for him because his veto can be sustained. He'll have friends on the Council of State who would support his policies, because remember, the governor controls a lot of state government workers, but not all. The other Council of State departments are their own fiefdoms, and they pretty much can run things regardless of what the governor says.
I'm going to jump in here, actually, because we have Brianna Kramer has been hightailing it from Wake Forest with Hal Weatherman over to the Wake GOP gathering in Cary, North Carolina, in Wake County. We're still waiting on those votes, right? Those votes coming in from Wake County. You really could have some impact, maybe not at this point, not as much room to grow.
Not so much for the statewide, but they are going to help determine what's going to be the composition of the state legislature. Those are going to be supermajority questions.
Yeah, big questions. Okay. All right, we have Brianna is with us here. Brianna, I hope you're doing well and you didn't speed too much getting from one spot to another. Tell me what you're seeing there at the Wake GOP gathering.
Yes, hi Donna. Yeah, things are heating up here. Everybody's pretty excited around here. Everybody's crowded behind me here in Cary. The Wake County GOP is hosting party, and we're just moments away at this point, is what I hear, from calling this race, the presidential race, for Trump. They're expecting it in the next 20 minutes. So everybody's just waiting on that, waiting around for them to hopefully get that call. Michelle Morrow, she stopped by here and spoke to the press. And then Karen Milligan, she's the Wake County chair. She's going to be giving a Trump victory speech anytime here once that race is called. They say there's a good crowd here, good energy, they're feeling really good, and they're paying attention to Mecklenburg right now. That's an area they're watching as they get ready to call the presidential race.
How is Michelle Morrow?
Yeah, she came back here actually to speak with the press. And so she just stopped by for a little bit. She didn't give a speech and didn't really stay for a whole lot, is what I heard. But she was back here and in high energy, high spirits, talking with everybody and trying to get some media coverage today.
Sure.
So Brianna, what's the mood like there?
Everybody's pretty excited, looking around here. Everybody's in good spirits and just waiting at this point. I think we're trying to stay patient, stay calm as they watch the screen up front. Everybody's huddled around the screen and just kind of waiting it out right now. But it seems to be a good mood around here, high energy for sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, good. Do you know what they're going to be watching for in some of these Council of State races?
The Council of States, we're still kind of waiting on which ones they're paying more attention to. I know I was just at the Hal Weatherman event, and things are looking promising, pretty good up there. And so right now we're just kind of waiting, and I think everyone's eyes are on Trump and the presidential election right now.
Absolutely. Brianna Kramer, Carolina Journal reporter, reporting from Wake GOP gathering. It looks like some high spirits. People are excited about the night, I think. Thanks, Brianna.
Thanks, bye.
Okay, so it sounds like everybody's pretty excited. It's going well.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I'm not surprised on that. This has been a pretty good night overall for Republicans at this point. We're looking at supermajorities possibly. They've definitely secured their majorities on this, even with some toss-up seats, the potential of some overturns on it. But overall, we're now looking at the point of, do they have a supermajority, and how many Council of State members are they going to get across the line? Not with the only real exception to that being the governor's race, which has already been called.
Okay.
And one of our colleagues has texted us a little bit earlier suggesting that perhaps the House supermajority has been lost at this point, but we don't have any confirmation of that, and some numbers still to come in. But that, of course, would present some new challenges for the Republicans.
Sure.
They would have to work in new ways, because if they can't just override a Josh Stein veto with their own vote, they're going to have to bring some Democrats along or work with Stein on compromises.
Well, it's going to be a little bit more difficult in this year than other years, since the Democrats have tried to purge a lot more of their more flexible members that were more favorable towards working with the GOP in certain regards, especially in the House. I believe Michael Ray is an example of that. They tried to take out Cecil Brockman, and I'm forgetting
Shelley Willingham.
Shelley
Willingham.
Willingham.
They targeted as well.
Sure.
Yes, but that seems to be a seat that looks to have gone that way, with Cecil Brockman and Shelley Willingham still being there.
Great, great. I think we're going to try and get over to the newsroom, see if there is anything going on. I know everybody's been watching these races really closely. Jeff Moore, of course, one of the things that Jeff's really been great about talking about is the RNC relationship with Whatley there at the head and the Trump campaign. So
I see Nick is in place.
Nick is in place.
I can see him where I'm sitting. So Nick, what you watching?
Continuing to track the details out of election night. Just go. You guys have been going over some of these totals statewide, and we're approaching now, and now over 75% of the election day vote is in. That puts us at 1,999 out of just over 2,600 precincts that are reporting in thus far. Overall, when you look at absentee by mail, early in-person voting, and election day, we're at about 63% of the vote, and Trump is currently still leading the state by 3%. And what I find interesting is that some of the Council of State Republicans are actually trailing very far behind Trump, sometimes 5 or 6 points, and I'm not sure that we were expecting that beforehand.
Right. And it looks like Riggs has now taken the lead over Griffin.
Yeah. I'm seeing that as well, and it's very interesting. The idea going into election day was, we look at the 2020 numbers. Trump won the state by 1.4%. It was a little over 74,000 votes, and obviously none of these races are over yet. There's still a plethora of votes outstanding. But the idea was that if Trump could double or maybe even quadruple his margin that he had in 2020 in the state, that things could be very successful for Republicans all the way from the Council of State down to local county commission and school board, even something as simple as soil and water, because those coattails would pull some of these other candidates across the way. The likelihood of that still happening is still possible. A lot of these races are within 10 or 20,000 votes right now. But I am surprised with the margin that we're seeing on Trump statewide, is that at this point that we're not necessarily seeing that. As I look at some of these races, specifically looking at the Council of State as of right now, again, with the idea that with 75% of the precincts in, 63% or so of election day votes are in, Trump is up by about 3 percentage points right now, which would double where he was at the end of election night in 2020. With that, obviously, we talked earlier about Josh Stein and Mark Robinson. Rachel Hunt currently has about 100,000 vote lead over Hal Weatherman in the lieutenant governor's race. Jeff Jackson has got a 150,000 vote margin over Dan Bishop in the attorney general race. Dave Bollick is leading in his race, the Republican for state auditor. Steve Troxler, Mike Causey are looking good in their races. I just do find it interesting that Trump is doubling right now his numbers from 2020, yet some of these, we say down ballot races, but they're still pretty close to the top of the ticket. Attorney generals, I think 5 or 6 races down. The fact that those candidates are underperforming Trump at this point by upwards of 6%, Mitch and Don, I think is very interesting.
And Nick, with Trump going down from one point, we saw him with about a 5-point lead in the not too distant past, now down to 3. But that is obviously a sign that more of the Democratic leaning counties are starting to report. And that's why these Council of State races, who the last time we talked about this, all of the races were in the Republicans' camp, even if it was just slightly. Now with Democrats retaking the lead, now with Riggs retaking the lead in the Supreme Court race, that means some of these Democratic-leaning counties are starting to report their numbers, and so we're getting close to the probably what the margins are going to end up being at the night. Very tight races with some going one direction, some going the other direction.
Sure.
Yeah, you guys mentioned it earlier when Donald Bryson was in studio with you. There were a couple of counties that we were waiting for details on. New Hanover County was one of them, which has been noted by many national publications, including the New York Times, as one of 5 counties, not just in North Carolina, but nationwide, to watch as what they call a bellwether county. When we last checked in, they had reported nothing but about 6,000 or 8,000 vote by mail ballots. They did report all of their early votes in, so there's 104,000 votes in there for them, but they still don't have a single precinct reporting. So there are still some counties like Mitch, like you were just mentioning, that are still withstanding. But I do think, and I'm going to just do an update here real quick to check, with 75% of our precincts in, Mitch, I think you're onto something there. These margins are probably not going to move all that much over the next, hopefully, hour and a half or so as the rest of these results pop in.
When New Hanover comes in, that's not going to be a huge swing one way or the other, because New Hanover is a very tightly divided county. Right. So it's not like Wake or Mecklenburg. When their numbers come in, those are going to be big gains for Democrats. Mm-hmm. When New Hanover comes in, it's probably going to be lots of new votes for both parties, because it's fairly evenly split, which is something that you saw from your years working in Wilmington.
Oh, absolutely, and it's why it's kind of seen as a county that goes the way that county goes, the way that the state goes. And as of right now, this was a state that Republicans had won, or a county rather, that Republican presidents had won for 30 years. The first time a Democrat won the presidential race in New Hanover County was 4 years ago in 2020. So there's been a huge emphasis down in southeastern North Carolina, New Hanover County, the city of Wilmington, for Republicans to regain that and take control in New Hanover County. But like many other areas in the state, seeing explosive growth and a lot of individuals, to the chagrin of locals in Wilmington and portions of southeastern North Carolina, a lot of folks from the Northeast moving down there and maybe not voting necessarily the way that they want them. So very much a purple county with individuals, essentially a lot of them splitting their ballots between Democrats and Republicans.
Sure, something I want to get some thought and your thoughts on. We've talked about this kind of off camera and in the newsroom around today. There's a real enthusiasm around Gen Z. Some of these very early, young, maybe even a first-time voter. My own kids, and it's a frustration, I think, with the economy. And so they were listening much more carefully this time around than I know I did when I was 18.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity to read a study. A Harris study, no, not related to the vice president at all. The Harris survey, the Harris poll, they surveyed about 2,600 young voters between the ages of 18 and 40. They broke down those groups, and the headline of the story, Donna, was that these individuals tend to lie about who they're voting for. But if you actually dug into the story, what I found more interesting was that the top issue with amongst these individuals between the ages of 18 and 30 years old, 57% of them said the economy was the top issue. Abortion barely cracked 20%. Which I found to be shocking with all of the national media attention. And you would assume an issue like abortion, which tends to lean itself to individuals that are younger, would have a bigger play. But Donna, like you were just mentioning, some of these other issues, while they might make good, they might make good television ads, they might make everybody excited about what's going on politically. When it really comes down to it, we're looking at something as simple as the economy. When you can't afford groceries, when you've just graduated college, you're straddled with $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 worth of student loan debt. You get your first job out of school, you're probably not making a lot of money. The idea of purchasing a house is essentially gone with sky-high interest rates and the current value of property. I mean, I was looking at the used car market over the last couple of months. It's insane. You're looking at cars that have 80, 90,000 miles that are selling for $10, $11, $12,000. You add all of those factors up, and I think you've got a very anxious group of younger individuals. There's a kind of an online nickname for these individuals. Zoomers is the one that's used, but it's also, they've been called doomers, because they just do not have a positive outlook on things going on. And I think a lot of that absolutely revolves around the economy. So that is something that is going to be very interesting to watch. And there's a real possibility that this election, depending on how things shake out in the next couple of hours, could end up being decided by young voters, which historically and traditionally is not a group that is very politically activated at all. So post-mortem, when things settle down, and hopefully midday tomorrow when everything is all said and done, it's going to be very interesting to go back, look at those numbers, and see where some of these young voters fall.
Sure. Right. Nick, I'm going to interrupt you. You're absolutely right. Nick, being one of those Zoomers/doomers, we're going to be watching those closely as all of this breaks down in the post-election, because I'm really curious to see how these numbers work. So, I want to see exactly where those kids are voting, and did this economy, this race, the energy around it, did it make them voters for life? And I think that is an important point to make.
Yeah, and we have to stress that we're looking at 75% of precincts reporting. We still have a bunch of cases of results to come in. Turnout at last report around 63%.
Sure.
So there's still going to be some more turnout. There's still going to be some more precincts reporting. Still times for still opportunities for both a shift to the left, shift to the right. It really comes down to which are the outstanding votes, and are they more of the blue votes or the red votes? Clearly, Josh Stein wins. It looks like Donald Trump wins. But a lot of these down ballot races will really be determined by the votes that are still out there.
And it looks like Ken Fontenot's back up in those. We were just talking about that with Jim Sterling. All right, we've got joining us now Angela Hite. She's a Nash County resident, something we've talked about throughout the evening and really on CarolinaJournal.com. That Nash County, right there around Rocky Mount in Congressional District 1, has become something of a bellwether, actually, in North Carolina, as goes, Nash County is kind of how the state goes. So Angela, I wanted to talk a little bit, if you would, fill us in on what's happening there in Nash County and what you're seeing for Congressional District 1.
Absolutely. I've been here at, it's called Factory 633 with Lori Buckhout's campaign. She, at this point, is down about 15,000 votes. And so she's been watching the maps. There's still about 28 precincts the last time I checked that need to check in. If we've looked at our other races in the area, we've kind of gone 50-50. We kept our House seat with Alan Chesser, but he won by less than 2%. Lisa Barnes for the North Carolina House won by 2%. But then we've had some other races that have been closer. So Lori is hanging on there. I talked to her right before I got on, and she's like, Trump's ahead at this point in North Carolina. So there's still hope, and we're winning the war, but right now we're still fighting a battle.
Thanks so much, Angela. I really appreciate you joining us. I know the energy is high there in Congressional District 1 with Lori Buckout. That district we've talked about before, it's been changing, but it really has been held by Democrats for quite a while.
Yes, it has been a Democratic district for as long as anyone can remember. The district has changed substantially. We talked earlier about how for many years this was the first district of Walter Jones Sr., back when North Carolina had a very different form of Democrat. And then the district was changed to be a majority-minority district. Walter Jones Jr. tried to run for that seat and lost. He ended up switching parties, becoming a Republican, and ended up winning in District 3.
Right.
But District 1 remained for many years a majority-minority district. Don Davis is a minority, but the district is not necessarily geared toward being a majority-minority district anymore, and is, in many respects, the only toss-up district North Carolina has now, with 10 pretty solidly Republican districts and 3 solidly Democratic districts within our congressional delegation.
Sure. All right, we're coming up on about 10 minutes till 11, so we're scheduled to wrap up here in about 10 minutes. But let's go through some of those numbers and what we're looking at right now. So, you know, we've got 75%. Let me refresh here.
That's right.
We've got about 78%. If y'all want to take that dashboard, we can kind of run through some of these numbers to wrap what we're seeing right now at 10 minutes or so until 11.
And if you look at the federal, are you on the federal
I'm on the
right
federal
now?
here.
So Donald Trump, now his lead, which at times we saw in the neighborhood of 5%, is now at about 2.5%. Sure. Remember when he won in 2020, it was 1.3%. So right now he's doing better than he did the last time around, but still not a huge margin. I mean, this is 2.5%, and I think a lot of people were saying, okay, for some of these down ballot races where people really don't know the candidates that well, perhaps Trump needs to be 3% or so for them to be carried forward.
Right.
So he's really in that area where maybe he brings them along, maybe he doesn't.
Right.
It just depends on whether that 2.5% margin holds. We know that there has been at least one news organization that has called North Carolina's electoral votes for Donald Trump. We've not heard it from the Associated Press, which is the organization that we've basically been relying on. It was the AP that called the governor's race for Josh Stein. So we'll be watching for that. The expectation is that Donald Trump wins, but it's not as clear who wins the other races. If you look at that hotly contested Congressional District 1, at 273 of 281 precincts now reporting. Don Davis still with the lead, but close. It's about 6,800 votes, if my math is correct. He's at 49.71%, with Lori Buckout at 47.59%. Still, depending on which of those precincts are out and how many votes they have, it's a potential that Lori Buckout could pull that out. But as those numbers of outstanding precincts tend to dwindle and Davis's lead continues, it makes it more likely that he holds on to that seat.
And both Democrats and Republican groups nationally and in the state putting a ton of money and effort into that Congressional District 1 race, certainly.
Because it could help decide who's going to control the U.S. House of Representatives at the end. I mean, everyone expects that Republicans will make a gain of 3 seats here, because right now our congressional delegation is 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. Looks like it's going to be 10 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Could be a 4th Democrat, could be 11th Republican, depending on what happens in District 1.
Sure, sure. If we switch over there to, I've got the dashboard up on our Council of State. Of course, Josh Stein, that was called pretty early. It looks like, I mean, if we're looking at 78% reporting, he's 15 points ahead. That's significant.
You know, in our Carolina Journal poll, had him at 13.5 points ahead, and all of the experts were saying, no, I mean, he's probably going to win, but that's too high. I talked to one Democratic insider who thought their worst case scenario was 4 points, and that the best case scenario was maybe 7 or 8.
Right.
If it's 15, that's
pretty
huge.
Significant. And you did see the Mike Ross, the Libertarian, getting about 3 percentage points. I wonder how many of those were people who said, I can't vote for Robinson, I don't want to vote for Stein. Libertarians.
That's probably at least a few of them, although Libertarians have polled somewhat well in some of these races. They have polled well enough to remain on the ballot. But yes, you have to think that at least some of that is people saying, I would normally vote Republican. I'm not voting for Robinson, but I'm not voting for Stein. I'll go with the Libertarian.
But Robinson did pretty well, though, because you do have, he has a pretty strong base, and a lot of Republicans, that Republican base said, you know, I like what he says, I like his speeches, his stump speech, his values. He's interested in the things that I'm interested in public policy. So,
but he's doing much more poorly than other Republicans up and down the ballot at 40%. I mean, that's got to be a low. If you look at the rest of the Council of State right now, with the 78% of precincts reporting Rachel Hunt back in the lead for Lieutenant Governor by about 100,000 votes over Hal Weatherman. You see Jeff Jackson with about a 2.5-point lead over Dan Bishop. Dave Bullock's leading for Auditor. Steve Troxler, no surprise, up by 7 points in that Commissioner of Agriculture race. Mike Causey up by about 4 in Commissioner of Insurance. Luke Farley up by more than 5 points in Commissioner of Labor.
Wow.
The Secretary of State, now Elaine Marshall, back in front. So the world is not going to stop turning. Elaine Marshall looks like she is leading by 2 points in the Secretary of State's race. Mo Green now back ahead in Superintendent of Public Instruction by more than 2 points. And then for Treasurer, Brad Briner, the Republican, up by more than 4 points in that race as well.
Wow, and we still have a little bit of room to go, 78% of our precincts reporting.
And it really just depends on where those districts are. Are these the are these Republican-friendly, Republican-heavy districts, or are they the Democratic precincts? I mean, or Democratic-friendly precincts. If so, if they're the Democratic-friendly precincts, then basically those results that we just mentioned to you probably hold, but just get stronger in one direction or the other. If they're more Republican areas that still need to report, it's possible that we could see swings again back toward the Republican candidates in some of those Council of State races. We've not been spending a lot of time on legislative races just because there are so many of them, but we have heard from people who've been following this very closely that it's going to be neck and neck about whether the Republicans keep their veto-proof supermajorities. There was an indication perhaps earlier that they fall short in the House. I heard an update afterward that maybe if they could pick up one of those Wake County seats that has now become more Republican-friendly, then maybe they stay at 72, which is the number of votes you need to keep the supermajority. But that's going to be one we're going to have to watch probably after we go off the air and watch during the course of the night to see what happens.
Right. And we will certainly have all that coverage for you on CarolinaJournal.com. Updates on all the races, final results will be there probably overnight, certainly by the morning. But one thing I do want to do is give a quick update on the presidential race. North Carolina has not officially been called for Trump, but it's looking more and more like 16.
Right, and you say officially. Remember, there's never an official call.
That's true.
The State
Good
Board
point.
of Elections wanted to remind everyone they don't call anything.
They don't.
All they do is count ballots and report them. The calls are made by media organizations, and we tend to rely on the Associated Press, which at last report had not called North Carolina, although some media organizations have.
Absolutely. Okay, so North Carolina's 16 electoral votes still remains to be seen. What camp they go in? Trump certainly leading at this point. But what we're seeing right now is that in races that have been called by the Associated Press, or others, the Trump is now standing at 207 electoral votes. If North Carolina were to win it, those 16 electoral votes would be added to the Trump tally. Harris now stands at 91 electoral votes. So still some room to go. It was an early evening, certainly, but we will have all the latest on CarolinaJournal.com, and we really appreciate you joining us here for live election coverage on YouTube, and all of our amazing staff, experts, just all the folks that really make this possible. And we just so enjoy having you join us and all the work that goes on here. And we really, really like bringing it to, like sharing it with you. You can find it on johnlocke.org and on CarolinaJournal.com. And then, of course, Carolina Elections is going to have all the breakdown of how these numbers really panned out. So thank you for joining us. Certainly, thank you for casting a ballot, participating in our elections. And we look forward to doing this again in 2 years for the state legislature. And check in with CarolinaJournal.com first thing in the morning.